Hey guys, something a little bit different today. I've compiled all the best malicious compliance stories. If you like this compilation style of video, let me know. Welcome friends to another r/malicious compliance video. You know, in my eyes, there's only one thing worth complying to, and that's when people like me plead and beg, could you please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below? That said, our first story of the day is by Exacting Muesli 6. Teamster forced me, you will pay me. I drive for a freight company. We own 13 terminals in 5 states. What we pick up today will deliver up to 600 miles away tomorrow. There's 2 job classifications, line haul drivers and city drivers. Line haul drivers bid these line haul jobs and are paid by the mile, plus all the on-clock time is paid by the hour. When a driver gets to his destination, the company pays for the hotel. I am designated a city driver. We do the pickups and deliveries, plus all the loading dock work. We're paid by the hour, overtime after 8 hours, important later. We operate in the north where winter weather can ice the road. No matter how bad the weather, our drivers are sent on their run unless the highway patrol closes the road, which is what happened. The line haul drivers were called to stay home because of this. Because these drivers had to go on their runs the next night, they lost a day's pay in the contract for line haul drivers. With no deliveries coming through, there was little work the next day. When I got to work the next day, the manager forced me and 2 others to make road runs to get the freight through. While they can't really force us, it's nice to have a change once in a while, so I did it. I started at 8:30 a.m. and was assigned to drive to a terminal 200 miles away, continue to another terminal 80 miles from there, then 250 miles home. DOT regulations are as follows. You're allowed to work 14 hours, including breaks, with 11 hours being driving time. It took me 6 hours to cover the first 200 miles, plus half hour on duty at the first terminal. The 80 miles to the far terminal was a nightmare. Cars and trucks in the ditch with glare ice making uphills difficult. 3.25 hours to make 80 miles. They had shipments to go back with me that had to go. Gee, their city drivers had the same slippery road as I did, so 2.25 hours on duty waiting for a load for me to haul back. The math said 9.25 hours driving time, plus 3.25 hours on duty waiting time, plus 1 hour break time, equals not enough hours to start the 250-mile, 4-hour, in good weather, drive home. They put me in a hotel for the DOT mandatory 10 hours off duty. The roads were better the next day. I made the 250 miles home in 5 hours. 45 minutes to service the truck and finish the DOT log sheets, and I was done. I told the boss they had to pay me on the clock for all of the hours from when I punched in yesterday until when I punched out today, with less than 1 hour break time. We only clock off for a 1/4 hour lunch. Drive time plus on-duty time plus 10 hours paid in the hotel. 28.25 hours with everything over 8 hours paid at time and a half. $707.50 for getting her done. They refused to pay me the overtime and paid me like I was an over-the-road driver. 530 miles at 48 cents per mile, $254.40, plus the on-duty time of 4.25 hours at $20 per hour, $95. The total being about $350. Teamsters have a grievance system for pay disputes. I filed my grievance at the $350 line haul pay and how it doesn't apply to me as I was forced. As an hourly employee, I am entitled to time and a half for all hours over 8. They owed me $358 extra. I won. Basically, what the malicious compliance breaks down to is they in their contract are not paid to do long haul work. So the people changing things up and saying, you have to do this work, and them just going, okay, is a malicious compliance because they're gonna be on the hook for way more money owed to OP than they ever expected. Because they can't just change how they pay somebody that has a contract with them, regardless of the type of work they did. If your employer was trying to change the work you did, without realizing that if you did that work, you would get lots of bonuses, do you think it's fair game for that employee to stay silent about how much they're going to be owed and take the job anyways? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Our next story is by Ansela Johnla. Keep the drill inside at all times? Got it. I'm working in a DIY store on day shifts at the moment, the blue and white one for any Brits reading. One of the tasks is to fasten dividers into the shelving. These are wood shelves, basically pallets suspended between 2 beams, so this requires screws and a drill. The drill belongs to the team leader, and it's a decent one that cost him a bit, so he's wary of leaving it unattended, especially as the general public are thieving gits. I've lost more than one knife to light-fingered customers. We're in and out of the aisles, so he has one rule. The drill does not stay there unattended. It is to be in the line of sight of one of us at all times. I really need the loo, but neither of my coworkers are in sight, and they're in the opposite direction to the loos, which I definitely need to reach sooner rather than later. So the drill stays in my sight, firmly grasped in one desperate mitt as I scurry off to the staff door, tucked against my body as I manipulate the lock, at my feet as I sink onto the throne with a sigh of relief. And when I finally emerged and returned to the aisle, the drill dangling from my hand, naturally they'd needed it while I was gone, and if I'd been allowed to hide it behind something, it would have been there. But I was told it had to be with one of us, so with me it was. I had to drill all of them in, front and back instead of just front. I think a good way to combat this is take it every time you go to the restroom. Maybe start saying it's a comfort thing. Maybe seek out the drill every time you have to go to the restroom. Then maybe they'll realize maybe it's a little overdramatic to make sure it cannot ever leave your eyes. But to play devil's advocate, I kind of understand if it's a really good drill that they paid for out of pocket, you don't want to lose it to some, well, thief. Our next story is by an anonymous poster. Only respond to calls you tell me to? No problem, boss dude. I work in industrial maintenance, specializing in the automation side of things, robots, PLC, and HMI stuff, but frequently respond to other machine downtime regardless. The facility I was at for this story did radio dispatching via the maintenance team lead. He kept track of who went where and what machines were the priority. Team lead was a screamer at people he thought he could bully, and would often tell us how lucky we were to have a job there, which will lead into a pro-revenge story for later posting. I didn't just burn that bridge, I blew it up while walking away and not looking back at the high-order detonation. Anywho, having finished a call, I saw another floor tech under a machine struggling to get a hydraulic pump and motor in place, so I stopped to help. Soon after, I get dispatched to another downtime call. I responded that I would be about 5 minutes to get there as I was helping this guy. I didn't tell you to help him, you only go to calls I tell you to. Okie dokie there, dude. He had a habit of assuming things and taking actions for granted, so I knew it wouldn't be long until I could help him step on his own Richard. A week or two later, I get sent to take over a call from the off-going shift. I got to the machine X14, and before I could even get a solid turnover, he pulled me off to go to a higher priority downtime. This continued the rest of the shift. I would get done, and he would send me to another call, wash, rinse, repeat. At this place, any machine that was down for 2 hours or more due to the breakdown had to be escalated. Depending on how long, about 6 hours, the head mother freaker in charge of regional operations had to be informed. Every day at 6 hours into shift, all the floor-level managers and supervisors had a chicken poop finger-pointing meeting with the planned head mother freaker in charge to update downtimes, root cause, and subsequent shipping disruptions. During the meeting, the Richard head in question called me and asked, "Hey, what did you ever do to get X14 running?" My response? I didn't get it running. You pulled me off before I could get a proper turnover and never sent me back. I only go to calls you send me to. Remember? I could feel the anger radiating through the radio, but the DIQ was busy trying to explain itself to the plant supervisor. Yes, he did try and blame me. I don't and never have given a freak about playing that game, so I used the so-called open door policy the plant manager had to let him know what happened, and pointed out there were 30+ witnesses due to him yelling his instructions to me over the radio. He tried to retaliate in his way, but that culminated in the aforementioned pro-revenge story, which I'll post in the next week or so. Basically, this guy's just terrible at dispatching and doing their job properly. They were willingly just moving OP from job to job without ever making sure that anything actually got done. No leniency, no attention to detail, just haphazard and kind of witchy. Our next story is by Helical Twist. Malicious compliance backfire. Have a jerkhole colleague who started the same job 2 weeks before me. He was and still is a bully. He had multiple HR complaints in the 2 weeks before I joined and since. He attempted and still attempts to use his 2-week seniority to act as my manager. He gatekeeps access to information and would exclude me from shared projects. He excludes me from conversations too. After many meetings with management and HR, the conclusion is that behavioral change won't work and we'll have to accept him as he is. So I agreed to this with my manager and said, fine, I'll keep out of all the projects he's excluded me from and only speak to him when spoken to. She agreed. 2 weeks later, management calls me to a meeting to discuss my recent lack of commitment and motivation. They extended my probation a second time for it. I referenced our agreement, and all they said was, "Yeah, I didn't think of that. It's good we have these conversations to support you through your probationary period." Management also told me that because I work later hours than said Jerkle, that it's making his job more difficult. I said I'll come in earlier then. We have flexible hours. And she responded, "Oh no, the policy says you can start when you like, so don't change." So which is it? For reference, I only come in 1 hour later than this guy, but apparently so much work is already done by him in this period, and there's nothing left for me? There's always work left for me, because he's the one that assigns it. I don't know what it is about this 2-week guy, but I guess because they have slightly more seniority, they're kind of taking their side. But it definitely seems like they're very one-sided. They just don't want to rock the boat at all, and that's coming at the cost of upsetting OP in their experience. I think for OP's sake, they better just try and make sure they have a fallback plan just in case, because it seems they're willing to extend their probationary period and kind of throw them a bit more under the bus, rather than deal with the issues that the 2-week older guy is generating. And our final story of the day is by Not Yours, My Own. Sure, I'll transfer you to the store. This happened years ago when I was working in a call center to put myself through uni. I worked in the call center for a major family entertainment company. We had multiple brands under the company umbrella, and the one call center managed calls for every store nationally. Unless you already had the phone number for a specific store saved, and they weren't available online anywhere, there was no way you'd get through to a store without speaking to us first. We handled all bookings, cancellations, refunds, inquiries, etc. for every store. We were able to handle about 99% of inquiries without involving or bothering the stores. The reason the call center existed was to make life easier for both the staff in-store and the customers. It could be very busy and noisy in our centers, and by speaking to us, we could quickly and efficiently handle bookings and inquiries without store staff being distracted from other work, and without the customer on the phone having to deal with all the background noise and being put on hold while staff deal with issues in the store. We were upfront about the fact that we were a call center and most customers didn't care. We were not outsourced, we were employed directly by the company and based at their head office. So in many ways, we were actually in a better position to help them than the stores. As if I really wanted to help someone, I could actually go straight over to Bob from marketing and ask about the terms of the latest deal, or ask Jane from finance to fast track a refund. Occasionally, you would get a Karen that would complain that they just want to speak to the store directly, but most people were pretty good. The rude customer. One day, I get a phone call from what I thought was just an average customer. She clearly didn't hear my intro where I say, "Thanks for calling company name National Contact Center." She wanted to book a birthday party for her child at one of our bowling alleys and was perfectly pleasant throughout most of the process. This was a very last-minute party, booking just over a week out. So we already had a lot of bookings in the system for the bowling lanes. She tried booking online and wasn't able to because there weren't enough free lanes next to each other for the party. I was able to move some bookings to different lanes in the system back end for her and free up enough lanes for her booking. Birthday party calls were slightly longer than regular bookings as there's a lot of variables to go through. And unlike regular bookings, we have to take a deposit. Because of this, we actually used the same website booking system to make birthday bookings that customers could use themselves online, instead of our usual back-end system that we use for most bookings. That's because it automatically takes us through all the questions and the deposit step by step. It's also important to note that when you use the online booking tool, it creates a temporary booking in the system that lasts for half an hour. This is to ensure that no one else can swoop in while you're booking and steal your spot. If you complete the booking within the 30 minutes, it's yours. And if you don't, it frees up the space for someone else to book. I go through the entire booking process with the customer and get to the very last step, the deposit. As usual, I read out our policy regarding taking a credit card payment over the phone, and something within her snaps. It's as if she only just realized she was speaking to a call center. However, I suspect it was simply because she didn't want to pay the deposit. She says, "Why am I talking to a call center when I rang the store?" I say, "You actually rang the call center as we don't publish numbers for the stores." This is to ensure a smoother process for you and make sure our staff in store can be focused on the customers in front of them. She says, I don't care. I want to speak to the store directly. I don't want to speak to a call center in India. I'm white with not even a hint of a different accent, but she just assumed because we're a call center, we're based in India. I'm simplifying what she said as unfortunately I can't remember exactly what was said, but she was extremely rude and racist. And her arguing went on for a while, to the point that I took a short break from the phones after I hung up and my manager had to ask me if I was okay. I tried explaining that her booking would need to start again if she was transferred to the store, but she didn't listen and demanded to be transferred. The malicious compliance. I did exactly as the Karen asked and transferred her to the store. I spoke to the store manager before completing the transfer and explained the situation, and he was cool with it. Looking in our back end, I knew that there was no way she'd be able to make her booking until the 30 minutes was up, as the temporary booking created by the system was still there. Eventually, I move on to other calls and forget about her, until 2 hours later when she calls back wanting to book again. This time she's rude from the out, immediately demanding to be put through to the store. I waste her time reading her the official statement about how I can help her with all the inquiries, etc. She demands to be put through, and ultimately I ask why, as I won't transfer without a reason. And even though I remember her and know the reason, I want to hear her say it. I take great pleasure in telling her that, unfortunately, we're fully booked on that day, as someone else had booked out the only lanes we had available in the meantime. Of course, this answer was unacceptable to her, and she demanded to be put through to the store again. I transfer her and speak to the same manager again, who tells me that he couldn't book her because of my back-end booking from earlier. So he advised her to call back later to book. She asked him for the direct store number, but he refused to give it, meaning she had to call me back, and I got to inform her that the party would no longer be happening, all because she had to act like a Karen. Honestly, there's really not much more to add to this story. It's exactly what it should have been. OP was helping them throughout every step of it, and it was going to go smoothly, and then all of a sudden the gears in the Karen brain got unstuck and started rolling again, and they latched onto something that didn't matter at all, which was, why am I talking to a call center? It's like, lady, just finish your booking. Worry about the call center after or something. But yeah, probably just didn't want to pay the deposit and wanted to argue. Make an individual ticket for each case? So be it. Setup. We have been having constant issues with a certain service acting nonsensically for like a week now. We forwarded it to the ones responsible for it, shall be called L2 for simplicity and anonymity, and received their confirmation that they're working on solving it. Unusually, we also got info that even though the issue appears for masses of people, and they all get the exact same issue, it is individual, not systematic, so we should collect and forward each case to them. This is an unusual situation to say the least. Furthermore, I see that my earlier tickets on the matter are now on L2, waiting status. Years of experience tells me that this means we'll sit on it until the system in question gets decommissioned, then ask if the issue still persists. That is not hyperbole. So there I was, yesterday 1800 hours or so crunching mail, when I realized that 2/3 of our inbox is filled with this now. No one actually wanted to bother with recording tickets for it since it was obviously a bogus request. Shrugging, I drew up a template for it and started pulling them in and submitting the tickets en masse. By about 20 or so, I get a call from L2, highly unusual. They mention the massive tickets and ask me if I know that they know about the issue already. Oh, certainly, but my instructions are to follow your request and submit each of them for individual resolution. I can forward you the info we got before I start submitting the next batch if you'd like. No, that won't be necessary. Keep up the good work. And so I did. Amusingly, by 7:30 the next morning, we got a confirmation that they suddenly and miraculously managed to fix the issue. I'm sure the thinly veiled threat of 100 more tickets had nothing to do with their sudden haste. Extra, they still managed to screw it up and say that one case was resolved. I notify the client, then 5 hours later, also say that that one is not resolved after all. You gotta love that they were willing to just bury and sit on this problem. I imagine as long as the entire thing still worked enough, they'd try and just delay it and ignore it as long as they possibly could. If you're working at a place with some software that had a very annoying bug, you submit it to your support and they try and basically sit on it like this, Would you be willing to sit there and just submit it over and over and over and nag them until they finally fix the issue so that you hopefully don't have to be annoyed with it anymore? Or would you be kind of in the as long as I'm getting paid, I don't really care mood? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Our next story is by Kitten Disguised. Do it in your way. So we cheated. I'm a uni nursing student, and on top of our own profession's education, we also have to take compulsory language classes, Chinese and English. The tutors teaching these classes were not from our own department, but from the language departments, and boy, the Chinese tutor was awful as freak. His teaching was nowhere near good, but the worst part is with the assignments and tests, where he would give us the work, it offered very vague and limiting instructions that didn't help much. When we tried to ask him to be more specific and give clearer instruction, or to give marking rubrics, he never gave straight answers and just tried to dodge it. But after the work was done, he would nitpick every little thing and grade us really low. We were all very frustrated about it, but had no way to resolve this. One day, the teacher said that we had to take a quiz on translating classical Chinese to modern Chinese, which I don't know what good it does to our profession, but okay. Since we'd learned that in our prior education in high school anyway, not a big deal. Before, when we learned it in high school, we were taught to translate it word to word and very literally for the sake of tests and exams. But it was never the only way to translate, as you can also interpret according to the meaning rather than to the words, which both ways work. Anyway, we asked the tutor what he would expect, and he again dodged it and only replied, "Just do it in your way, and it'll be okay." And so we did in our own ways, and some in a malicious compliance way. A few days after the quiz took place, we were all informed by our department's head that we had a cheating issue within our class, and stating that academic integrity is held highly, and that they have no tolerance towards such things. Turns out that the tutor accused half of our classmates, around 50-ish people, of cheating because their works were similar, and all the suspected students were sent to see the department's head for explanations and discuss disciplinary actions. Two of my best friends were also sent that way, and I was able to hear this hilariously idiotic story. So the tutor accused several students of cheating because their answers looked similar, and the students were confused because the quiz was not complicated, and what on earth was he expecting out of a simple translation of a small paragraph? Surely there would be a lot of similar usage of wordings here and there. The head was not satisfied with the reason, and went on saying that if they had not copied each other, they must have copied it somewhere else on the internet. It was COVID time and we did the quiz on Zoom. Some of the students said, yeah, we certainly did some research on the internet because we were not told not to, which they were completely right, because the tutor never said you're not allowed to, and according to the tutor's instruction, they could absolutely do it since it's their way. The head was still not satisfied and said that the students should have put in citations and references if they had done any research online. However, the students defended themselves to have done the research with a dictionary, some with multiple different dictionaries, and that's why their wordings were similar. How and why would you cite so many different dictionaries on a simple paragraph translation? Us students have never been asked such stupid things. And clearly the department head had no actual idea on what was going on. She was just listening to the tutor's side of the story while refusing to believe that the students had not cheated. This argument went back and forth between 50-ish students and the department head for hours, until another department head, a cool guy, decided to intervene and told the students to go home as he understood and would try his best to explain the situation to the other department head. Later, as we heard, it was actually not the first time that the cheating scenario had happened. The exact same tutor had made similar accusations towards a previous batch of students on the exact same quiz as well. Somehow it didn't cross his mind that it was his problem, and maybe he should just change the quiz format once and for all. As the tutor received all of the backlashes from false cheating accusations, he was trying to cover his butt and announced that cheatings were interfering with the gradings. And so the quiz result was voided. Now everyone needs to take the new test that didn't involve translating. This pissed everyone off, and the students not being accused were angry too at their time being wasted. Since none of this would have happened if the tutor had used the new test instead of that buggy translation quiz. and he was trying to shift the blame to the students. In the end, he mellowed down and suggested the involved students take the test in order to redetermine their grades, while the others could take the test on their own free will. He never brought up the term cheating again. At the end of the term, the language department asked me to do a survey on the teaching quality, and I gladly obliged, giving the worst possible score and commenting on how bad the teaching was. So most, if not all of these people had just learned within the last year or two how to do exactly what this test was. And the test more or less is, take the sentence, "Hi, I live in a 2-story house," and just write that sentence in another language. Why would you be all that surprised when everybody puts down, "Hi, I live in a 2-story house," but just in a different language? It's not really a question that would have a very subjective answer unless people just don't know how to do it. Our next story is by Wave Lindsay, must notify manager to use restroom. Before I get into the story, I realize there are jobs where notifying your boss when you leave your desk or post is a normal practice. However, that was not the case at this job. We had top secret clearances and handled collateral secret equipment and sensitive encryption key material on a regular basis. They assumed we were adults and generally treated us as such. Also, the fallout isn't juicy, sorry, but the story's funny to me. I was an airman in the Air Force working in ComSec. It's difficult to fully explain this job to people who have never done it, but the short version is glorified inventory management with penalties for messing up, including but not limited to prison time. We were working out of a temporary facility, and not all of us in ComSec could fit in the secure room, so we were spread out in multiple offices. Myself and my direct supervisor shared a small office, while my NCOIC manager was in a different one. One day, I did what all civilized humans do at least once a day, and went to use the restroom. I came back, my supervisor said Sergeant Smith, I honestly don't remember her, my NCOIC name, but that they were looking for me, so I went to her office. I said, "Yes ma'am, you wanted to see me?" They say, "Why weren't you at your desk?" I say, "I was just using the restroom, ma'am." She says, "You need to be at your desk at all times, and when you're not, you need to let me know." I said, "Yes, ma'am." At the time, besides email for computer communication, we were using Skype. It was common practice in that office to send quick messages to each other using Skype, so I made sure to let her know every time I left my desk using Skype, just as she ordered me to. Every bathroom break, every drink from the water fountain. I even notified her if I was leaving my desk to come talk to her after she told me to come talk to her. Every single time I left my desk, she was notified. "Ma'am, I'm getting up from my desk to grab a Form 16 from the printer." She says, "Where are you using a printer in a different room?" I say, "I'm not, but I have to leave my desk to retrieve it." That was the last straw. She had enough. She told me to stop telling her when I leave my desk, except when I leave for lunch. From my experience reading all these stories, it seems that they're probably just a bit of a control freak, probably irrationally upset in one moment that they weren't right there. They become quick to assume, you should just tell me anytime you're gonna leave the desk, not realizing there's a lot of opportunity to say, hey, I'm leaving the desk. I'd say a decent analogy is on Snapchat or Twitter, maybe turning on notifications for a friend that chats or puts a story up multiple times a day. You might be interested in it, but after a few days, maybe a week, you realize, I don't know if I want 3 to 4 notifications that they posted a story item every single day. Although maybe that's not the best analogy because some people do. And our final story of the day is by 11. New rules are going to cost you your business. I worked for a manufacturing company operating hot foil printing machines. For the first 6 months, everything went smoothly. I was working 2 machines like most of my other coworkers. Working hours were 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with an hour lunch break, although nearly all of us came in early to set the machines up and left late after cleaning up the machines at the end of a run, usually 15 to 30 minutes extra per day. The owner then decided he wanted to retire and sold half of the company to a larger firm with the intention of staying on another year before selling the other half. The new company insisted on all workers, not office staff, clocking in and out, as well as increasing the workload by pushing production goals. The machine they used to clock everyone in and out was the cheapest they could find, and nobody knew how to set it up, so it shifted the cards into the right place to print the time. So times would often be printed on top of one another, or our out time would be printed on the in column, etc. Big headache for the office workers trying to sort out the mess from 30 plus workers each week. To start, everyone carried on as normal, clocking in when they arrived and clocking out when they left. A week in, and everyone on the production floor is called into the office. There will be no unarranged overtime being paid, and everyone must clock in and out at the right time, was the message from the new boss. 15 minutes of downtime just to tell us that? Okay then. We would all arrive at our usual times and start to queue up waiting for the clock to tick over to 8 a.m. Then everyone would punch in. Took around 4 minutes for everyone to use this one machine. If a run wouldn't be completed before clocking out at lunch, it wouldn't get started. So around 11:45, the production floor started to get quieter. At 11:55, it was almost silent while everyone queued up to clock out for lunch at 12 o'clock. 12:55, everyone queuing up again to clock in at 1 p.m. 4:45 p.m. would bring in another quietening. A week later, we all get called into the office again. Some people were not putting in their full hours. They were clocking in a few minutes late and or clocking out a few minutes early each day, and this was not acceptable for the new boss. Also, we had to make sure the cards were printed in the correct position so it was easier for the office worker who dealt with the wages to calculate our times. No mention of fixing the clock machine, so we diligently set about making sure the cards were printed correctly. End of queue and clock in at 8:03? Okay, clock out at 2:03. After 3 months, production was so far behind that they had to start asking workers to come in on weekends to clear the backlog of orders that were waiting. Pay a time and a half for those first 4 hours, then time and 3/4 for any hours over that. Nice for those who could do it. A month later, and the new boss was losing so much money they had to make cutbacks. How? By getting rid of workers and no overtime. So now they not only couldn't complete the orders, but were asking the remaining workers to work harder and run more machines. I was one of those made redundant. I heard from one who wasn't made redundant about 6 months later that the company folded a month after that as workers quit due to unrealistic pressure, and they were so far behind on orders that the customers dropped them as a contractor. The owner never did get to sell the remaining half and retire as planned. I don't know if the old boss was like completely hands off or just really unaware of what was going on here, but considering it wasn't a travesty when they sold the initial half, you kind of wish that they would have spoken up and saved the day before it got to the point where they lost the other half of what they could have sold. But I guess we're not really sure what that dynamic was like. One thing's for certain, the new boss was just not good. Straight up ran that place into the ground. Did you even read them? I had a mid-level English class at my college in Utah that was online and over the summer. Most summer teachers are almost always adjuncts and teach remotely from other locations, typically out of state or hours away. I knew something was up when the syllabus said, you can use American English or Queen's English, just be consistent. I'm dyslexic and didn't know so at the time. So English was a struggle the semester before. This is not because I couldn't grasp English, my native tongue, but all the reading was hard and comprehension was a challenge. Not all online classes are created equal. You can't take an in-person class, scan in a few documents, and call it a day. Most people don't even scan the images well, so chunks of paper can be missing completely. If uploaded properly, I can take the files to a web-based read-out-loud program, and I could follow along as a robot voice reads me the content. Her files were poorly scanned photocopies and were JPEGs. This meant my program wasn't any use. So I'm struggling with her class, and I'm about halfway done with an assignment with about 20 minutes till it's due. So I go to a file corrupting website to make a seemingly large version of the same file to turn in, but the website will make it impossible to read. This would give me a buffer between turn-in, which would be on time in the system, and when the professor emailed me saying the file had an issue opening, and I could send another copy of my now finished paper. Some teachers caught on, but if you only do it a few times, it can save you. Turnaround for an email was about 3 days from the professor, and as her emails came from a UK extension, they came at odd hours. The UK is about 6 hours ahead of Utah for reference. Did I mention that while nearly 100% of teachers gave you to 11:59 p.m. local time to turn in an assignment, she did a conversion and made assignments due at 11:59 p.m. United Kingdom local? That was right in the middle of my night classes, but she didn't care. So I waited for the anticipated, "What's up with this file? Send another" email, but none came. Checking my grades, she had given the assignment an A. I had similar issues in the next assignment, and she gave that one an A too. Cue meme of Crunk saying, "Oh yeah, it's all coming together." After a while, I didn't even bother to do my work at all. If you weren't going to bother reading it, why should I bother doing it? I only did the first 4 or so assignments, some at-home quizzes, and the midterm test, mandatory on campus. I aced it. For everything else, I just renamed the corrupted file in the needed format and submitted it. As I was turning it in on the same day it was due, it didn't draw suspicion, and the A's kept coming in. The final was a 10-page paper summarizing the content we learned. I didn't want to push my luck, so I started it and got about 4 pages in. The summer semester ends a week before fall semester begins, and as was the case with nearly every fall, there was drama to deal with that took my time and attention. I blinked and it was the day the paper was due. I was still at 4 pages, so I corrupted it and submitted it. Better than a half-done paper, or so I thought at the time. The paper got a 0. No warning, no communication, no anything. It brought me from an A to a C-, which for English wasn't a passing grade as far as credits needed. So I emailed the professor, but her semester in the UK had started, so she wasn't emailing back. So I went to the department head and emailed him. A week or so into fall semester, he finally got back to me. "Thanks for hurrying, dude. Not like I'm freaking out here." He said he was able to get a hold of the professor and figured out that the reason the final got a 0 was she couldn't open it. So now we fall on our integrity sword, Zoe. So I made an appointment with the department for an in-person appeal and met the department's associate head. The entire time she was being polite and understanding, but wouldn't move from the file not being able to open. She whipped around the screen to show me something, and I noticed one of our tabs was Canvas, our online classroom program. "Do you have my Canvas info?" They say yes. "Can you open files I previously submitted?" They say yes. "Go back to the assignment before, the one that the teacher gave an A, and open it for me." Downloads file. They say it won't open. "What about the week before that? Maybe go 2 weeks back." Obviously, none of the files are opening. I can't remember exactly what was said, but I offered to show proof that I was never contacted about bad files. And there were no comments on my submission saying that she was having an issue. I basically told her if the professor could get paid for pencil whipping my grade, I should be allowed the same courtesy. The associate head had a slack-jawed look, said she would discuss the matter with the powers that be and get back to me. While my grade on the final never changed, my overall grade rose to a B. I wasn't required to take any more English classes for my degree, but I checked, and the UK professor wasn't in the schedule for the next summer's list of classes. May not be malicious compliance, but I sure did feel malicious. While I do think it's kind of annoying that the teacher was not consistent if they're going to just kind of fudge the grades a little bit, OP was still attempting to cheat the system through and through. Do you think OP deserved the 0 on that final? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Our next story is by RubenLip14. Can't leave 15 minutes early once. Lost 1 hour of free work every day. This was for a summer job in college. Me and my roommate worked about a 15-minute drive from each other in the same general direction from home. So we carpooled. 1 week, I'd drive, drop him off at the front door at 8:30, go to my office, park at about 8:45, and it would be almost 9 by the time I got to my office. Parking lot wasn't that close and the building was big. I'd then leave at 5, and it was about 5:30 by the time I picked him up. The next week, he'd drive and drop me off at 8:30, pick up at 5:30. We were being paid to work from 9 to 5. This was office work, and IT working on individual projects, so the exact times we were in the office didn't really matter anyways. So the result of our carpooling arrangement was that every other week, one of us would end up working an extra hour every day. I had no problem with that because it saved gas, parking fees, and made the commute more pleasant. One day, my friend asked if I could leave work 15 minutes early the next day as he had an evening commitment and had already cleared it with his boss. I said it should be no problem and asked my supervisor, "Hey, do you mind if I leave at 4:45 instead of 5 tomorrow?" Instead of agreeing, he said no, because we have set times and we have to start at 9 and finish at 5, and not 1 minute earlier or later. So I complied with that. The next day, we both drove individually so that my friend could leave early, But the rest of the summer, whenever I showed up at 8:30, I read a book till it was 9 and stopped working at 5 on the dot, and either read or just stared at the wall while waiting for my ride. Not letting me leave 15 minutes early once cost him about 2 months of having free productivity for an hour from me every day. If somebody is giving you extra work and working hard and doing good work for you, you shouldn't nickel and dime them when they ask for one short thing, one time. All you stand to do is upset them, and if you upset them, surely they're not going to be very motivated to keep giving you more work and extra work. I would feel personally slighted just like OP and probably do the same thing. This next story is by Cadet Garlic 9690. Company policy requires a call-off 2 hours before my shift? Okay. I'll be your early alarm. Recently, I've been dealing with health issues and a COVID scare after being exposed to someone who recently tested positive. My boss has been very vocal with me by constantly asking me to do half days and/or begging me to come back the next day. For some background, I work with children. I've also shown multiple signs of COVID over the past week, so I'm working on finding a time to take a test. My boss is way more concerned about me going back to work because of our short staff, rather than making sure I'm healthy enough to be around the kids. Needless to say, it's been frustrating. Yesterday morning, I called up my boss at around 7 a.m., an hour before my shift started, to call off another day because I was still showing symptoms. She was obviously angry about it and decided to give me a lecture on how company policy states call-offs must be 2 hours before your shift. Okay, so I would have to call her at 6 a.m. before the building even opens up for the day. Not to mention, her shift doesn't even start till 7:30, so I would most definitely be waking her up early. I try to be respectful of her schedule, but I guess company policy doesn't allow that. Last night, I set an alarm for 5:55 a.m. to check on my symptoms and see if I need another day. Sure enough, I'm still sick. I called my boss at 6 a.m. sharp and waited for her to pick up. She finally answered and in the most groggy voice asked what I was calling for. I told her I was calling off again to take care of myself to schedule my COVID test again. Her response, I kid you not, was something along the lines of, "Why would you call me this early?" I know this is kind of mundane compared to other posts here, but I enjoyed giving my boss a taste of what she's been putting me through for the past couple days. Maybe now she'll actually let me take care of myself for once. There's definitely no playing around to be had when somebody has a COVID scare, especially when they're working with children. You don't want to pass that to the kids because the kids are definitely going to spread that around to at least their parents. I know for the boss, it's probably pretty stressful to be so short-handed and people are still calling off, but you gotta bite your tongue and deal with it because it's a pandemic. I imagine they told OP they had to stick to the policy to, try to discourage them from doing so maybe, but only stood to make things even more annoying for both the boss and OP. This next story is by Undecided MN. Can't have white rope lights to celebrate Christmas? Okay, get ready for the color explosion. About 20 years ago, my wife and I had just gotten married and we rented a condo where all the windows and sliding doors faced the parking area. My wife, to celebrate our first Christmas as a married couple, put a white rope light on the railing of our 2-foot grilling area. It was a nice little gesture. That night, we went out to dinner, and when we came home, found a letter under our door. The letter read, "All holiday lights must be removed immediately from the exterior portion of the condo. Christmas or other religious lighting is against HOA policy, and failure to remove can result in fines and other legal actions." My wife felt horrible and I couldn't believe it. The owner of the condo had left a copy of the HOA regulations, and I found a nice little loophole. Apparently, they could regulate lights on the exterior balcony/grilling area, but not lights inside the condo. Game on. I took my wife immediately to the big box hardware store and picked up 2 fake Christmas trees, about 2,000 colored lights, a light ball, and whatever holiday decoration I could find. Our condo had 3 windows and a sliding glass door. I filled up each one of those windows with lights, crisscrossing around the inside of the perimeter of the window, and one had the LED ball hanging in the center. The sliding door had the Christmas tree in full view, completely covered in lights and ornaments. Also, the sliding doors were full of Christmas lights. My electric bill must have tripled. When you came into the parking lot of the condo complex, you saw a beacon of light full of Christmas spirit. You probably could see the condo from orbit, and nothing could be said by the HOA snitch. Apparently, at the next board meeting, a proposed rule change was brought up to limit the amount of holiday lighting being shown through windows. It was quietly pointed out by another HOA board member that was an attorney that you probably could not regulate activities inside a person's dwelling. I moved out before next year, but I never received another notice. I'm definitely not a lawyer, so I can't really argue about the legality of policing what you can and can't do inside your house. But I would say, if it's something that faces the outside, it might be a little bit more negotiable. Kind of like how, if you're in your living room with your blinds wide open, and somebody's walking down the street and they look over and look and watch inside your living room, technically I think you're judged as being in the public view. So maybe there is something the HOA can do in regards to that kind of stuff. And our final story of the day is by Psychotic Writer. Sue me? Okay, I will. My nephew bought a car transmission on the well-known auction site. A few days later, he received a crate. He opened it and it was full of junk parts. Just some old brake rotors and junk to have the crate weigh what the transmission would have weighed. Of course, he contacted the seller and they claimed they sent a transmission and refused to do anything. My nephew got a bit heated and an argument ensued, and the seller finally told him if he didn't like it, sue him. Now the good part. Said nephew's older brother just happens to be an attorney. Pretty convenient. Nephew calls brother, explains the situation, and the brother says he'll look into it. Comes to find out, the seller was out of state. The selling price was large enough to be a felony. Plus, with the shipper selling over state lines, it turns into an interstate commerce violation, which is a federal offense. He sent the seller a typical lawyer letter full of legalese, but pointing out the issue of a possible felony and the interstate commerce violation. My nephew had the money back in a few days, and of course, no charge from the family attorney. I think the one takeaway I really got from this is it pays to have a good lawyer in the family, that's for sure. Sure would be nice if you're in the heat of a legal issue where you could just call up my cousin Vinny and he'd come over and save the day for you. Also, anybody that tries to scam people over like eBay or anything like that, they deserve to get sued and they deserve to get reprimanded pretty harshly. At least in my opinion. No phones allowed at work. Tell them to call me directly. I work in healthcare where phones are to not be used while on the floor caring for patients, etc. for privacy/WHS reasons, which is fine and understandable. Most of us have our phones on us or in the break room and don't use them unless on break or away from patient care areas. None of us check our phones while busy, and if they do, we'll always get called out for it by other staff. We were all recently in a meeting where we were told we were no longer allowed to have our phones on us as it was a distraction and against policy, meaning not to be used unless we were out of the unit or off hospital grounds. A few people piped up and said they had young kids in care where their phones were the direct communication for the carers, or if there were issues at home that they needed to have their phone to have quick contact if needed, even if it was left in their handbag and could be checked on breaks. Not only that, but we have a half-hour unpaid lunch break where we should still be able to use our phones as we see fit. But this was also denied as it's still in a healthcare setting and could cause WHS issues. WHS being work health and safety risks. Now, I know working in healthcare and personal mobile phones don't mix as it really is against policy. However, the issue with denying us complete access was a total overreaction. The issues with requiring quick and direct contact with home or other outside work contacts was brushed off, and we were told if the issues were that bad at home, we shouldn't be at work. Many people were a bit taken aback by this, saying a lot of the home issues are resolved by a quick text back, and not allowing us access to our phones while at work was a bit unreasonable. Our manager said if that is the case, we can give people her direct work number, and for contact to go through her, and she'll relay the message to us or give the phone to us to talk to whoever is calling. So, cue malicious compliance. We all gave our at-home/spouses, carers, schools, etc. the direct work line to call for any reason if they're unable to get in contact with us directly, and the phone started ringing continuously. First was a lady whose husband needed approval for a big financial decision at home. The next was a vet calling to tell a coworker their dog needed to be put down. I got a call from my children's daycare saying my son had been bitten and was bleeding, mandatory reporting policy. There were other several phone calls within the span of a few hours, with my manager running to find us to relay messages or pull us off the floor so we could speak to the callers, wasting more time than if we were allowed to shoot through a quick text or take a quick phone call while on our breaks. The next day, we were told we can have access to our phones while on break and to please tell our home contacts to stop calling the manager's phone. It took a few days for everyone to get the message, meaning there still were many unnecessary calls coming through, but it made it obvious that the need for communication lines to be open at home was important. You know, I was kind of thinking about stuff like this the other day, when even as recent as the early 2000s and all throughout the 90s and before that, when there wasn't a cell phone, a rule like this is probably fairly reasonable. But nowadays, phones have become so synonymous for that instant form of communication. Not just for reaching out to a buddy or for slacking off, but also when there's really dire situations going on, it's the go-to tool to be able to help and cover those things. So just for that reason alone, I think it's extremely unethical to prevent somebody from having access to their phone. I think it's fine to have restrictions on when they can and can't use it, obviously, but if somebody has a potential emergency going on, they deserve to have that phone there so they can address it if needed. What do you guys think? Do you agree? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Our next story is by Outer Juice. You need an adult to enter, go find one. Nothing too crazy, but when I was 15, I traveled to the Final Four with my grandfather to watch Kentucky play. They lost, but there was a fan fest going on at the convention center. It was an awesome indoor baseball field, tons of basketball hoops, and just all you could imagine. It was great. I went alone that day and got to the front of the line for the entrance band, and the worker said, "Can I see your ID? You need to be 18 or older to come in, or need an adult to sign for you." OP said, "My family's not with me today. Grandfather has a bad leg, and he didn't come. I don't have anyone to sign." The worker says, "Well, you need an adult to sign, and you got a line behind you. Go find one." Okay, cue malicious compliance. Go find an adult, you say? Okay. I went to the nearest Kentucky fan I could see and said, "Hey sir, could you be my grandfather for the next 10 minutes? New grandfather said, "I would love to, you're a Kentucky fan." We went to the line and I said, "I found an adult." And she rolled her eyes and said, "Fine." And he signed my paper and I got in. Fun story, great guy, go Cats. I mean, they literally did say go find an adult. If I was in OP situation and I wanted into the game, I probably would have done the exact same thing. Stop, go back, and look around for the nicest looking older person. Say, "Hey, I'm here all alone because my grandfather had a bad leg. I need an adult to sign for me. Could you just sign the paper for me so I can get in and have some fun?" What kind of adult would say no to that? I feel like if a teen came up to you and asked for help in that regard, you'd have to be kind of soulless or like a true Karen to be like, no, I'm not related. You need somebody you know." This next story is by Adorable Peanut. Useless rule leads to malicious compliance. This story is from when I used to work at a gym. The owner of the company hired a new operations manager who made everyone miserable. She made rules that made no sense and would not listen to why they weren't functional. For example, she made mandatory meetings that we were forced to clock out for. Also, she made a new rule that morning: shift employees would be required to work 7 days a week, as opposed to 5 days a week, because she really didn't care for my morning shift coworker and myself. One day, she announced a new rule stating that front desk employees would have to go over the intercom twice an hour to remind gym members to put their equipment away. I informed her that everyone wears headphones and would not hear these announcements, and she said she didn't care, and to do it anyway. She told our manager to write a script for us to read from, as she believed we were too incompetent to come up with our own way of phrasing it. Well, seeing as this was now required, I told her I would absolutely make these announcements. Twice an hour, I would pick up the intercom phone, and in a very dull, confused voice, I would stumble over the words on the script while sounding out the longer words. It would take me about 45 seconds to read a 2-sentence script. Since she believed I wasn't very intelligent, I just played dumb and acted like that was the best I could do. My coworker began to do the same thing. Realizing she couldn't say we were reading it wrong on purpose, The members of the gym hated this manager and got a good laugh out of our petty antics towards her. Needless to say, we were no longer required to make announcements after 1 week. Please put the weights back when you're done with them. Thank you. Our next story is by Rusty Bathtub. Order me to buy your kids expensive gifts for Christmas? Okay then. So my brothers and sisters basically ordered me and my wife to buy their children, our nieces and nephews, expensive gifts for Christmas because, according to them, we were well off. We're not really, we're just financially responsible. But since they asked for it, and it's already on the budget, we decided to be vindictive this year. So for the most amazing Christmas, our nieces and nephews will each get 5 tubs of Play-Doh, which sticks to everything, 5 kilograms of multicolored kinetic sand, which gets everywhere, 5 tubs of gooey slime, see all above, 5 packs of Easy Fill water balloons, age-appropriate Nerf gun and safety glasses. This should be a fun Christmas. Update 1. Well, this blew up. Oh man, I should have asked first before I ordered the stuff. You guys have such diabolical ideas. I think this could be the start of a new Christmas tradition, depending if my siblings remain naughty or nice. For those suggesting Legos, we already gave a few small boxes of them a few months ago as giveaways for our son's birthday. These should complement them nicely. For those suggesting a drum set or noisemakers, I left them out intentionally. It would be a bad idea since my sisters work nights at the hospital. I don't want them to lose sleep during the day and affect their jobs at night when lives are at stake. Sleep is important, you don't mess with it. For those saying that these are not at all expensive, exactly. You demand someone expensive gifts, you get cheap and annoying ones instead. But will the children care? No, they'll think it's the best Christmas ever. My wife told me to buy us a couple of those automatic Nerf guns from the money we saved from the gifts. You know, for protection. Also, we will not be including the water balloons, as I was reminded that I do not want a repeat of the great impromptu water balloon fight of 2018, which I may or may not write about, but it would fit snugly in r/entitled siblings. Also, no glitter, it's too much. Dang it, that last one was gonna be exactly what I said. The glitter is the worst thing you could possibly do. Do you guys have any other ideas of diabolical gifts you could give these kids that would just wreak havoc on the house, but in a fun, innocent kid way? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. What would be great is if the kids on Christmas opened up their Nerf guns, then OP and their wife go out to the car and come back with that big machine gun with like 50 bullets loaded. Just leave that house covered in Nerf darts. After that point, you will never stop finding Nerf darts in the most random places. This next story is by XTileXX. I work in a warehouse. We're allowed to have speakers but not headphones for safety reasons. Last week, I was informed of this rule and sent home early because I was wearing earbuds. I completely understand the rule after thinking about it, but my supervisor plays favorites and allows our forklift drivers, as well as team leads, to wear earbuds. I'm not a forklift driver and I don't work around them, but was informed we could not have them because you need to be able to hear your surroundings, and told to buy a Bluetooth speaker if I wanted to listen to music. Fast forward to today, I purchased a speaker and it arrived. Mind you, almost every speaker in our facility is a small one, like 100 watts at most. I purchased a 30,000 peak, 900 watt RMS, double 15-inch sub, and double 3-inch tweeter combo with its own amp. The speaker box itself is the size of a concert cabinet stack, about 5 feet tall and weighs over 100 pounds. My boss was both not impressed and impressed. As I walked in, his jaw dropped. Now they're trying to rewrite the speaker rule, but there's no way they'll ever do it, as his boss assures me for productivity reasons. And also, his boss encouraged me to turn it up when he told on me. I was able to hear my speaker blasting "Wake Me Up Before You Go Go" by Wham over 100 yards away over all the machinery at half volume. Is this fitting for the sub as my first submission? Absolutely fitting for malicious compliance. I feel like this is the equivalent of that scene in the movie where people are standing around and a lightning bolt strikes down and the entire world just seems to illuminate into daylight. OP wheels in their mega speaker, sits it down, and the entire warehouse just gets blasted with "Wake me up before you go go." And our final story of the day is by VLNTNWBR. Won't let me turn in my exam and tell me to check the work? Sure. Just for some context, this story took place in Germany, so English was taught as a second language. When I was in 9th grade, I had a bit of a problem with my English teacher. She hated me, probably because of my accent and choice of vocabulary were more American than British English. This was because I have relatives in the US, which I used to visit almost every summer. Here in Germany, all the English teachers I had were taught in British English, but were required to accept other accents as long as they were mostly consistent. She was the only one that really disliked my English to the point where she wouldn't call on me in class, even though I knew the answers. This knocked down my participation grade, but my final grades were still okay because I exceeded at exams. One of those exam situations I still remember years later. The exam stood out to me because a lot of the assignments were riddled with spelling mistakes or the occasional grammatical error. It was also very easy, so much so that I was able to finish what was supposed to take 90 minutes in about 45. I wanted to hand it in and enjoy some free time before my next class, but she wouldn't let me. Said something along the lines of it being impossible to finish this quickly and that I'd surely missed something. She asked me to check the work again before submitting. Notice how she didn't say check your work? I noticed. I went back through the exam, my work, and hers. I did catch some errors I made and corrected them, but I also marked every one of her mistakes I could find with a red pen. It felt great handing in that paper. It felt even better when she returned the graded exams. She was visibly angered, but couldn't really do anything about it without exposing herself. She was even more annoyed that I got a 100%. Let me just say that although this is a really good revenge and also deliciously petty, they kind of were right though, because you said that you did go back, you checked the work, and because of them, you got that 100%. I mean, to be granted, it probably would have been in the 90s anyways, but they did ask you to check your work, you found some errors. It's both a malicious compliance and amazingly petty at the same time. Just overall, such a satisfying thing to see happen. Don't underestimate history fanboys. This one's honestly more funny than anything, but I pity the professor that had to mark this guy's midterm. So I had a history class last year where, for the midterm, my professor wanted us to write a mini essay on a question she would give us. She said make it at least 1,000 to 1,500 words. Now, there was this guy in the class who thought he was already an expert on the subject. You know the type. He's the guy that would, well, actually, the professor, when she would start to explain something, and went as far as to say she was wrong about a topic she had a PhD in and had been teaching for 30 plus years. Eventually, she stopped his rants and wouldn't let him start debates and arguments in class because they were taking up time. So when we got this midterm, someone asked if there was a maximum word limit, and she said no. You can see where this is going. This guy decided for his midterm, he'd just include every fragment of information he hadn't gotten the chance to say in class, all for this one question. When we got our midterms back, she made a joke that some of us gave really detailed answers. She even told us that someone wrote way more than expected. The word count? 10,000 words. I'm doing a master's dissertation this year, and my minimum is 12,000 words. So this guy, for a midterm in an undergraduate lecture that was meant to be 1,000 words, wrote an almost master's thesis length answer to one question because he was peeved the professor wouldn't let him rant in lectures anymore. Needless to say, our next project had a maximum word limit. Here's a fun frame of reference for anybody that wonders just how long 10,000 words is. If you take OP's entire story here, this guy's 10,000 word malicious compliance is 34.5 times longer. If I were to read through this guy's story, we would be sitting here for over an hour. That said, if you were in class and you had a classmate who liked to or create mini debates about whatever subject and just waste a long period of time in that class, would you appreciate running out the time like that, or would you hate it because you just want to try to get through everything you can with the teacher? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Our next story is by an anonymous poster. Don't want to pay us for the whole trip? Noted. I worked for a job that required a bit of travel, often an hour plus. Which isn't long, but 5 days a week with often over an hour to and from, overnight, kinda got old fast. Anyway, the company was supposed to pay us 50-something cents per mile from our homes to the location. We were also supposed to drive a maximum of 50 miles. That second part went out the window, first job location. After realizing they were paying most of us $300+ per week for mileage, they decided to change it. We're only going to pay you from your home to the closest location. Let's just say the next week had less than bare minimum needed for the job, and they changed their tune real fast. It's short but sweet. So I think what I'm gathering here is basically people stop showing up because it's not worth it. Why drive all that way if they're not even going to pay you enough to cover anything? You're seriously gonna go from paying enough to make it just worth it for some people to, okay, we're only going to pay you absolutely the bare minimum. Well, yeah, I'm just gonna stop showing up, forget it. You had one thing going that was keeping me there, and now you took it away, so I'll just look elsewhere, keep the money. This next story is by Love the Yankees. Another expense account story. I was working for a large tech company that had a co-op relationship with several colleagues. We would hire undergrads for a semester. In addition to drawing a full salary, they earned college credit. While these co-ops were responsible for their own living expenses, we agreed to pay for their travel to our site at the start of the semester, and back home in the end. One year, I hired a pair of twin brothers, Jack and Joe. They drove the around 600 miles from their home in a single car and shared a hotel room en route. When they submitted their expense reports, Jack reported the hotel room and Joe claimed the car mileage. They each included the cost of their meals. Since the amounts were within the company's policy, no receipts were required. The accountants had no problem paying for the meals or Jack's hotel room, but they rejected Joe's mileage. They found a website that said the distance from Joe's hometown to our city was only 535 miles. Clearly, Joe was trying to cheat the company. Joe came to me terrified that he was about to be fired. He had a printout from Google Maps that showed the door-to-door distance was exactly the 602 miles he had claimed. I knew better than to argue with the accountants in HQ. I told Joe and Jack to resubmit their expense recounts, but each should claim the 535 miles and the price of the hotel room. A week later, they received their checks. I love that the company was trying to be super frugal about mileage, so they turned around and just doubled that amount. Honestly, I'm surprised if they went to the effort to verify the 600 miles, that they wouldn't have made a stink about both of them double charging the 535. But maybe whoever's just focused on the mileage and the value for that mileage and not the actual charges. Our next story is by Your Milk is Spoiled. Delivery requires $12 a minimum worth of food? No problem. This just happened, and while it's not as great as most stories I see, I thought this was just pretty funny. I have enough Pizza Hut points to feed an entire football team for free, and wanted to get a pizza delivered for my lunch. The Pizza Hut is literally a mile away, but I'm working alone and can't close shop to go get it. I get to checkout, and it won't let me send through my order because it has to total at least $12 before taxes and delivery, so you have to spend at least $17 to get something delivered. I just want my pizza, but I guess that's too much to ask for. Cue the malicious compliance. I sometimes order a half a gallon of sweet tea with my pizza, which costs $2.99, so I ordered my free Hawaiian pizza and 5 half gallons of sweet tea. Guess I won't have to buy any tea for a hot minute. Not too spicy, but I thought it might give some people a laugh. Honestly, I think if there's any laughs to be had, I think Pizza Hut's getting the last laugh in this story. I think it goes without saying, any drinks that they sell at these pizza chains are almost always marked up pretty well. Even with the free pizza, they probably made money off of those 5 half gallons of sweet tea. This next story is by an anonymous poster. Chef wanted me, the only pastry chef on duty, to do the ice cream stand when we had a party of 30 booked for the events room. Wanted to get this story off my chest since it happened yesterday. So I'm a pastry chef at a fine dining French restaurant where I work the pastry section. Usually I'm not busy and do a mise en place for tomorrow, and then closer to 9 or 10 p.m. I get busy with desserts. We had 2 event rooms where one of them had booked an ice cream trolley for which I had made the ice cream prior. I was expecting a waiter to stand at the trolley and just serve the ice cream since it's not that hard. But the head chef had other plans. I had told him earlier that I had a lot to prepare for tomorrow's service, as well as prepare 30 plus desserts for the second events room, where all of the desserts had to leave together. He was fine with it at first, but a few hours later, he came over and told me to do the ice cream trolley anyway. I was thinking to myself, whatever, not my problem anymore. As 8:15 p.m. struck, I dropped everything at my station and strolled over to the events room and started serving ice cream. For an hour and a half, all I did was chat people up and serve amazing ice cream. When I came back, I saw a grill chef scrambling to make desserts and the head chef nowhere to be found. I went to the events kitchen and I saw the head chef struggling to make 30 desserts with the sous. I took a smoke break and headed home since my shift ends 10 p.m. sharp. OP did absolutely nothing wrong. OP just complied and it turned out to be malicious. It's not OP's fault that when the head chef told them to do something else, they said, "Hey, I've still got a lot to do here, it's gonna be a lot of work." They tell you disregard it, go do what I told you to do. Alright, but you're gonna be the one sinking. Our next story is by Throw. Oh wait, no. We won't talk to anyone except for the name on the account. This took place about 15 years ago and involved a large corporate banking entity. I forget the name of it, but for the sake of the story, let's call it Fells Wargo. It may not truly be malicious compliance. It took some creative thinking outside the box, prompted by their own phrasing. You be the judge. There are important parts that come into play. 1. My spouse and I were young and dumb financially. We both had bounced a few checks on our own checking accounts. They were closed a few years prior. 2. Fells Wargo offered a way to rehab your checking account history. They offered you the opportunity to pay them an additional $10 a month to have the right to have a checking account. They restricted the release of funds and made life difficult to even have a checking account, but if you played by their rules, you could graduate to a traditional checking account after a year. 3. I participated in the opportunity checking and graduated my account. My spouse had lived without a checking account for a few years and wanted to try again. 4. I took my spouse to Fells Wargo. We specifically explained their previous history and specifically asked for the crappy checking rebuilding account. We knew my spouse needed to start at the bottom. 5. The manager of the branch enters the basic information and declared there was no need for the rehab checking account. They qualified for the regular account. We asked again to be absolutely sure. Yes, no rehab needed. Here's some starter checks. Your ATM card will be in the mail in a week. Gladly took an initial cash deposit of $500. Fast forward a week, we get the ATM card, call to activate it. Your account has been closed. Why? We determined you have bad checking history previously. We go round and round about how we covered this, disclosed it up front, and asked for the checking rehab account. You'll have to go back and open that account if you want it. We can't change the account. So they're closing the account because we needed to have the rehab checking account, the one we specifically asked for, and they refused. Facepalm. My spouse didn't know what to say, so we got on speakerphone. I started asking questions. So, will you pay the outstanding checks and refund the rest? No, we won't pay any checks. You'll be charged for return checks from your merchants. My spouse wrote 3 checks totaling less than $100. Very few places accepted starter checks. They have the funds in the closed account to pay them. Where's the issue? We don't do that. At this point, they became flustered. Nobody seems to ever have the funds or the audacity to demand them to pay checks written in good faith. They had no answers on how they refused the checking account we requested and would have been okay to have. They didn't think they had a responsibility to notify us the account was closed. And how dare we challenge their policy? They didn't like how I kept pointing out how there wasn't a single thing we did wrong, but they think they're not responsible for the return check fees. So they decided not to talk to me any longer. They hung up, we call back, repeat. Finally, they offer this gem. We won't talk to anyone except the name on the account. Click. Their only possible choice to avoid a difficult discussion where they owned their mistakes was clinging to not letting someone else ask questions with the account holder's permission. They even refused to let me tell my spouse what to ask and respond to my spouse directly. Can only talk to the name on the account? Okay, so I called back. Miraculously, in 60 seconds, I now identified as a different person. Thanks for calling Fells Wargo. May I have your name? Spouse's name. Long pause. You aren't spouse's name. Sure I am. Ask me anything. Name, social security number, address, mother's maiden name, date of birth. Verified it all as the name on the account. Long pause. No, you aren't spouse. I say, why do you say that? They say, because you're a man. Wait a minute, that's why you closed my account? Because I'm a man? I'm pretty sure that's against ECOA, maybe Reg B. Laws stating discrimination on gender is illegal. Banks can't reference gender or other protected classes to close accounts. Please hold. A manager finally comes on. We have a little back and forth about who I identify as, but seeing as how I'm not doing anything except demanding they pay checks on my spouse's account, written by my spouse with funds in their possession, there isn't much they can fight. But they finally agree to pay the 3 checks from the funds in the account. They didn't want to, even in the end, but the name on the account demanded it. Fallout? They had to do the right thing after wasting hours fighting it. I don't blame the employee for thinking so-and-so is not so-and-so, especially if they were the ones on the phone with OP earlier when they were saying they weren't the spouse. But if they answer all the security questions, don't they kind of have to accept it? I guess it eventually got there anyway. And our final story of the day is by WW76KH, The Grinch Who Won Christmas. The owner of the company is cheap. He'll buy himself a new plane, but cheap out on the employees. He drove off our project manager with his antics. This year, I need the company card to buy a Christmas tree for their front reception area. If I don't decorate, then nobody else will either. It's been that way for years and I enjoy decorating, so no skin off my back. Normally I would grab the card from the project manager, but this year I needed it from the owner who didn't like the idea of buying a tree, even though every year he says how much he loves the decorating. Every office purchase is an absolute haggle with him. Whatever, be difficult. I have all the time in the world. No decorations have been put up. All the fake trees in town have been sold out, and every week we get closer and closer to Christmas with no decorations. Employees have asked, and clients with lots of money, shiny new plane in the future, money, have asked, what happened to the decorations? You guys usually do such a great job. OP has a real flair for this, and you guys are lucky to have her around. It used to be so boring around here before she came along. Guess you just got told to go buy a tree. Me. Christmas may now commence. To be fair, it doesn't really shock me that new plane guy is being overly difficult about buying stuff like a Christmas tree for decoration. To me, it seems like most people in those kinds of situations are very, very frugal. Even if it's something that's like relatively cheap or not necessary but just helps the experience, they'll try and fight you on it a little bit. Yes, let me tell you all about chemistry. This is the word/story of my sister. I have a heavy background in chemistry. I'm not very smart in anything else, but I love chemistry, and it's the one and only thing I'm good at. I travel a lot, so often I visit many different hair salons. They ask me what I do, I tell them. The usual. In this case, it was a hairdresser named Sarah who told me she knew chemistry as well. It was a bit annoying because it wasn't the, oh yeah, I know a little bit of chemistry. We have to learn a bit of that to know what chemicals we're mixing. That I get. No, it was, oh yeah, I'm definitely a chemist too. It may seem complex, but we had to learn so much in hair school that we eventually pick it up like it's nothing. For example, we're taught about oxidation and stuff. I should be getting at least a bachelor's with the stuff we learn. It's pretty easy to learn. Yup. I was annoyed because she was basically dismissing the years I went to school learning, or even those who hold a bachelor's in chemistry who spent a great deal of time learning even the complex fundamentals. Like, I don't tell a hairdresser, oh yeah, I know so much about hairdressing, it's so easy. Like, you just go snip snip here and then that's it. I'm such a hairdresser, teehee. I respect their craft, and that's why I pay them to do what they know best. Saying you know chemistry because you know how to mix similar chemicals, similar as in properties, like different brands of lighteners, as opposed to chemists who work with a very wide range of reagents. And about oxidation is like saying you're a mechanic because you know how to change your windshield wiper and not to pull the e-brake when driving. Anyways, the client in the chair next to mine goes, oh wow, you guys know chemistry. Sarah looks at her and says, oh yeah, it's a few things you gotta know, but yep, I'm definitely a chemist. You can call me a trained chemist at this point. It's not that hard to pick up, even when you gotta multitask as us hair ladies do. Isn't that right, OP? Okay, she wants me to add to the convo, so I responded with what a typical college student would learn, and explain lightning as an example to the client. I talk about electrons, their properties, and reductive versus oxidative reactions taking place in the hair. How a reaction can be kinetically favorable, but not always thermodynamically so. I throw in some random sorta related crap that anyone with a bachelor's in chemistry would know, etc., etc., and finished it off with, Right, Sarah? Of course, the client looks at Sarah, and Sarah looks bewildered and has no idea what I'm talking about. After we finish my subpar haircut, I tip and she gives me the cold shoulder. Oh well, I gave you what you asked for. There's definitely way too many times where people see somebody doing a job that they think is probably easy to pick up. Like maybe art or music is a good example. People will see artists or musicians who are really good at what they do and they can make really awesome pieces in maybe an hour or two. And just because they're so quick, people will go, oh, well, that's going to be cheap to pay for, right? When in reality, you're paying for the expertise and experience of the person. It's not really the best analogy because this is more about actually knowing more than somebody else, but it's kind of tangentially related and it kind of popped into my mind. Have you ever been guilty of feeling a certain way like this about somebody's job? Whether it's art or chemistry or maybe something like psychology. Have you ever thought, oh, this job must be so easy. I could probably do that. When in reality, there's surely a lot more classes and training and expertise you have to gain to ever do something like that. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Our next story is by 5 Frog Margin. Tugboat Billy shoots himself in the foot. Billy was a tugboat captain I worked for about a year. He was a bit of a hick and not especially adept at anything but driving a tugboat and a barge. He also had a big mouth and the personality of a rattlesnake. Although every other captain and first mate at this company was from the same general area, none of them really liked Billy, not even his own first mate. Late at night in the wheelhouse, the first mate would often tell me stories about some of the dumb crap Billy said and did over the years. He only worked with him for about 5 years or so, but they'd all had known each other for years in this fleet. One of his most often told stories was about Billy shooting his mouth off in some bar years before. I forget what the initial argument was about, but it ended with Billy telling a small group of guys how stupid they were and, not surprisingly, getting his butt whipped, but bad. His beating was so bad, he not only wound up in the hospital, doctors discovered it affected his mental ability somehow. I'm cloudy on the details, but Billy fought with the US Coast Guard and had to prove that he was still mentally capable of holding a captain's license. It took a while, maybe as much as a year, but he won and went back to work. It was a few years later that I started working for him, until I quit a year later. 3 years later, I found myself near first mate's hometown, having just gotten off my boat. He picked me up and we went out for supper before he dropped me off at the airport. Nice way to catch up on what the old crew was up to. As it turns out, about a year earlier, Billy had smashed into a dock a little too hard and damaged it. It was enough damage to require the Coast Guard to be notified, and long story short, Billy was found to be at fault and was going to have fines levied against him and or pay for the damage. As Billy was never too smart to begin with, he actually tried to fight the Coast Guard's decision on the grounds of he can't be held responsible due to his diminished mental capacity that resulted from his assault years earlier. You guessed it, the US Coast Guard maliciously complied with his defense and promptly made him surrender his license and with it, his livelihood. First mate said he got a job selling used cars. I never really liked Captain Billy. It's kind of funny how hard Captain Billy fought to keep their job, only to then immediately pivot to the one excuse that he fought so hard to keep his job over as a way of trying to cover his butt. You can only have it one way or the other, Captain Billy. Enjoy the used car selling. This next story is by Vroom Vroom 26. Destroying a homework policy. So, my high school geometry teacher, I really did not like him and he did not like me, but I was good at math, so we couldn't really say much about it. For example, I once wrote on a test, a square has 3 sides, to test what he'd say. He marked it as incorrect, but I argued that a square has 4 sides, which means it must have 3 sides. So I didn't say anything incorrect, and he just awarded me the point. I was the worst, I know. Anyway, he assigned a nightly math homework, but would only collect random assignments and grade them. I'm a math teacher now, and I totally understand this. It's a way to make sure we were doing the work, allow students to slip up once in a while, and also a way to cut down his nightly grading. To this day, I think that's fair. But this is where he made a mistake. At the end of the semester, he would choose one day to hand in any missed assignment from the quarter, and he would grade it for full credit. He called it Amnesty Day. So me, being a 14-year-old, did no geometry homework for the entire semester. and turned in all 10 assignments to him at once on Amnesty Day. Granted, it was a brutal night to make up 10 assignments, but was so worth not having homework all quarter. He was so mad about it, yet, according to his policy, he has to grade them all for full credit. He's never had that policy since, and has cited me as the reason why. To this day, almost 10 years later, he references Amnesty Day of February 2011. I'm just thinking about how nice this teacher was in giving Amnesty Day to the kids, allow somebody that's suffering in that class or just not doing very well the chance to make crucial makeup work. And because one person was super lazy and gamed the system, nope, no more. All future students just have to suffer. It's a bit of a shame, really. Our next story is by WhiteWing2611. They wanted me to pay, so I gave them what they asked for. This is a very short story, but I felt much better after. I was at college learning hairdressing, and they made us charge every client we had, which made it hard to find models. We had to make sure we were all paid up before we could do the exam for that particular module, e.g. so many ladies' haircuts paid for before the cutting exam, etc. This college was a nasty piece of work. They constantly belittled us, called us names snidely, or made things harder for us. It even led to me having a mental breakdown just before this incident. I'm not even exaggerating it a little bit. A week after I came back from this, they started with the mean girl act again. Anyway, I had about 140 South African Rand I had to pay them before I could do my exam. So I said, stuff it. I raided the house and found every cent piece I could find and paid them in 5-cent and 10-cent pieces. I regret nothing. I don't like confrontation, but seeing the look on her face and her exclamation when she saw my clear plastic bag of cents, watching her have to count them out one by one, made me feel very warm and fuzzy inside. Just my small act of rebelling, but oh, did it feel good. Honestly, anybody that pisses you off and then demands money back from you, just giving them mountains and mountains of cent pieces is probably one of the best feelings ever. Although I feel like a lot of times, if you try that, they might just refuse to accept it and demand a better form of currency. No, you can only use bills, even though there's really no policy. Probably stand there and argue, well, I'm paying you exactly what you asked for. Doesn't matter what form of currency, it's legal tender. Our next story is by Hal Nietzsche. Why don't you just mind your business? Okay, I will. So my mother-in-law was pulling into a parking space at a Big Blue store, and the person parked in the space in front of her was starting to back out of the spot and had left her cart there. So my mother-in-law went to grab it and just used that for her shopping. The woman had left her wallet in the seat of the cart though. So my mother-in-law flagged her down and got her attention. The woman immediately started going off at my mother-in-law, telling her to mind her business and that the cart was fine where it was. So my mother-in-law decided to take her advice. She told the woman, "Fine, I'll mind my business. Your wallet will be at customer service," and then walked away. By the time the woman registered what she had said, parked again, and went into the store, my mother-in-law had already dropped the wallet off at customer service, where there was a long line, and warned them that she was pretty nasty. Apparently, when the woman went to get her wallet, she started to make threats and was threatening to call the police if anything was missing. The manager told her she would not be doing that and that it was her own fault she left the wallet in the cart. Honestly, this woman is incredibly lucky because if OP's mother-in-law was even remotely less caring, they could have just made off with the wallet. They got yelled at when trying to return it. Some people might just walk away to begin with. But I guess it is kind of easy to get flustered if you think they're trying to yell at you for leaving the cart there or something. And our final story of the day is by Baby Driver 17. Impatient customer pays for short temper. In celebration of me recently reapplying for my old high school job to work while I'm in school, I wanted to dig up this gem of a story. It's not as intense of a story when compared to a lot of stories here, but I feel like this happens all the time in grocery stores. I have several stories from this job similar to this one. This story happened some years ago while I was 18. I used to work/now work in a pretty pretentious part of town. The typical WASP and soccer moms love to come to my grocery store. I work in the department that takes customers' orders and shops for their groceries, and then they come to pick them up. One policy we have is that if a customer orders an item and it's out of stock, we'll offer a substitute item and honor a price change if the requested item was cheaper than the replacement item. One customer that was not a regular placed an order one day. I shopped the order, and lo and behold, there were several items out of stock. It's standard to call the customer to let them know of changes on their order before finalizing them. So I called this customer to let them know the changes I was going to make with them if it was what they wanted. This is how it went. I said, "Good afternoon, customer. I was just letting you know I completed your order and there were some out of stocks. We're out of the store brand cereal, so I grabbed a name brand one. We didn't have any store brand milk, so I had to grab an organic carton of milk. And we were also out of the mini cans of soda, so I grabbed a pack of full-size ones instead." The customer says, "That's great and all, but I don't want the prices of anything to change. I picked the items I chose for a reason." I say, "Yes, I understand. That's why we have a policy that we match." The customer says, "I don't care how you complete my order. I do not want you changing the prices of any items." I say, "Okay, that sounds good. I'll have your order ready in 15 minutes. See you soon." Cue malicious compliance. The items that were out were all store brand, so they were significantly discounted compared to the items I substituted them with. If they were less irritated on the phone with me and heard me out, I was going to let them know that I was more than happy to price match their items to be the same price as the ones they requested. Not more expensive. It feels like a punishment to the customer to charge them more for something being out of stock. The customer was so short and rude on the phone with me, I was not doing them any favors. Instead, I was following the instructions they gave me. I then went to the cash register and finished ringing up the items. Since they were very serious about not changing the price of any of their items, I rang everything at full price. When they got to the store, this is how it went down. "Good afternoon, here's your order. I just need a signature to confirm that you received your order." The customer says, "Why is this so expensive? I didn't order this many groceries. Why did you charge me so much for the milk and soda?" I say, "When we spoke on the phone earlier, you insisted that I did not change the price of your items. So when I substituted the out of stocks, I didn't alter the prices of anything. Organic milk is more expensive than our store brand conventional milk, and the soda is more expensive because it has more larger cans in the box. If you feel this is a mistake, I'm more than happy to run inside to fix this for you." The customer, visibly annoyed, says, "No, it's fine. Give me the pen, I'll sign." I say, "No problem. We hope to see you again soon." The following week, they placed another order, and they were much more friendly and receptive to our help. This is great and all, but I do feel like it's very petty. You don't really know what's going on with them. Maybe they were deep in a very stressful thing, so maybe they were acting out a little bit. Doesn't really excuse it, but you just never really know. It might have been the person's worst day of their life. And if your employer ever caught wind of something like that happening, they would not be too receptive in basically creating such a negative experience that most people probably wouldn't want to do that again over just picking the items up themselves. Have to be the one on the phone? Okay then. This is a tale from my days in working at a gas station. The manager was this crusty and frigid woman who looked like she sucked on lemons as a normal thing. When I started, she said that if anything ever happened and had to call, such as if you were sick, you had to be the one to talk to her personally. It couldn't be a family member or a friend, no exceptions. A couple of weeks into the job, and my coworker had a slip and fall when doing some of the janitorial work around the bathroom. It didn't seem that severe at the time, but she was definitely having issues. Still, the boss needed to be called, so I handed the phone to my coworker because she had to be the one on the phone. Ultimately, an ambulance was called and my manager showed up and started chewing me out for my lack of common sense. I remind her of the rule and shut down the conversation after that. If you found yourself in that situation with a manager chewing you out for doing such a thing, would you try and point it out how ridiculous their policy had been from the beginning to them? Maybe ask them, if they slipped and hit their head, should I have not have called at all? Maybe reconsider your policy. Let me know what you guys think about this policy in the comments down below. Our next story is by the True Facts Man, locking a kid out with a snake. When my dad was a kid, his mom gave him 2 rules. No friends in the house when no adult was home, and if when you're playing outside you see a snake, go inside immediately. You can guess where this is going. He was playing outside with a friend and saw a snake. So he went inside and closed the door on his friend and the snake. He probably didn't mean to be malicious, but you've got to admit that's pretty harsh. I can just picture OP's dad there as a kid slowly closing the door like, "I'm sorry man, my mom told me to. Run for your life, you can still make it out of here." Ka-chunk. Lock. This next story is by Mike MOJC. Try to pile on more work to increase your bonus? Not gonna happen. I oversee a team of 12 folks when it's fully staffed. We had a fellow move out of state for school. A lady retire to care for her grandkids when her daughter got sick. Then 3 people promote up within the organization, all within 4 weeks' time, so almost half the team suddenly became unavailable. While I'm involved in the recruiting and onboarding process, management up to 3 levels above me tends to be a bottleneck. Each time someone lets me know they were moving on, I informed management and gave them a running total. We were at 84% staffing, we were at 66% staffing, etc. Ads were placed, first round interviews conducted by me and a team lead, second interviews recommended to the next level of management, and that's where the process suddenly stopped. For a week, then 2, then 3, it commonly takes 2 to 3 weeks after hire to bring a new person up to speed to start being productive, and perhaps 8 weeks for a new person to reach 90 to 95% of median productivity goals. The existing team was ready to pull together and work harder to keep up with the work, but I took each one aside and coached them that the heavy workload they were under was not their problem to solve. Yes, customers were complaining. Yes, other groups in the organization were getting frustrated that our team wasn't getting things done in a timely fashion. I encouraged them to work efficiently and well, but to not put in extra unpaid time or contribute their own resources to projects. And if anyone was insistent in their complaints regarding the team's productivity, send them to me and I would explain the situation. Middle and upper minglement across the organization started vocalizing about how little work was getting done, when I played the Uno reverse card that, hey, all we need is adequate, well-trained staff and we'll be able to keep up. And managers 1, 2, and probably exec 1 all have potential interviewees on their desks for almost a month now. I started getting the stink eye from those folks. I found out later that one or a couple of those folks that I report to, and were also the next rungs in the hiring ladder, had proposed the idea that this team could run just as well a little leaner, so they arranged to find out. Oopsie daisy. Metrics indicated that organizational goals weren't met because of their decision, but I was able to provide the stats that prove the team's individual goals were met, and that in many respects, per-person efficiencies were improved. My team members got their bonus, middle management failed to achieve. So no bonus for them that year. I think it never fails to be one of the most disgusting things when you find out some kind of higher-up manglement thinks their team could work a little leaner if everybody just worked that much harder. So they try to squeeze the team into both working harder and working with fewer hands. It's no surprise that work started piling up and everybody started getting stressed out. Manglement that works like that doesn't deserve to just not get a bonus, they deserve to get replaced. This next story is by 5 Frog Margin. This is less malicious compliance than anal retentive compliance, but I kept my job and the villain got punished. I hope you enjoy it. Some years ago, I got a job tankering a barge. A barge is basically a floating container that gets towed around port to port. Tankering means to load it with fuel or whatever product you carry and discharge it in another port. There were 2 other tankermen, but we worked 4 weeks on, 2 weeks home. I'd worked 2 weeks with one of the other tankermen, 2 weeks with the other. I was pretty new to tankering, but I'd been working on boats for a few years and enjoyed it. There was little I liked more than getting on a ratty, rusty boat and chipping rust and painting till the boat was looking sharp, but I was a novice tankerman, and this boat was not looking sharp. Rust everywhere, storerooms a mess, dirty inside and out. The 2 other tankermen were of the opinion they were tankermen only, meaning they did nothing but tanker the barge, despite their job titles being deckhand and tankerman. They felt chipping and painting was beneath them, and did no other work. Both of them were from down south. One a Cajun, I'll call Gumbo, and a black guy from Mobile, I'll call Darnell. For my first trip, they both took a dislike to me. Darnell mostly because he was lazy and just wanted to hang out on the stern and fish. Once I started busting butt around the ship, he knew he had to start doing something and he didn't like that. Gumbo, however, he really hated me. He considered himself a barge captain, a title that didn't exist except in his mind, and saw me as a threat to his imaginary throne by, gasp, improving things. It wasn't just the boat. I got all the old load plans of the places they were cramming them, organized them by fuel amount, and put them in a binder. That way, when the customer said, please load 68,840 barrels for us, I would flip to the closest previous load to that amount, and we would see how much to put in each tank to match the amount. As a result, loads started getting closer and closer to the requested amount, making the customer happy. Gumbo and Darnell tended to just wing it, but being new, I was a little anal retentive about doing it properly. When I'm in unfamiliar territory, I tend to be anal retentive to the point of OCD to make sure I get it right. Also, I really did not want an oil spill on my watch. This went on for months, me getting more and more comfortable with tinkering, and annoying the other two by organizing storerooms, cleaning and organizing lockers, and generally making the boat a better place. Heck, I was even cooking. Strangely, there weren't too many accolades coming my way, and thanks to the assistant engineer, Jim Bob, I found out why. You see, when Big Boss would come, it would tend to be when I was home. Gumbo and Darnell were bad-mouthing me behind my back, harping on my lack of experience, magnifying small errors, and concern trolling that they were just trying to be safe. Even worse, all the changes I made, they took credit for. It wasn't OP cleaned out the paint locker, it was we got the paint locker cleaned out. Jim Bob often worked extra hitches and was a witness to everything. Jim Bob was a good guy, but from a poor town in Louisiana, dropped out of high school at 15, and was functionally illiterate. His illiteracy kept him from advancing, and as he was the only crew member to befriend me, I helped him out with his job, showing him all kinds of tips to streamline things like putting an Excel spreadsheet on his work computer that allowed him to quickly track and monitor fuel and lube use. After a while, he began relaying to me what was happening behind my back. His exact words, "You and I are like brothers, so I say to you as a brother, they're out to get you." I kinda figured this was going on as they both begun to play the passive-aggressive game we in the industry call playing freak, so I knew I was the odd man out. About this time, one of the barge's pumps went out, and the first thing the mechanic said was it was due to lack of maintenance, meaning tankermen weren't lubing, oiling, or greasing the pumps. At crew change, Big Boss came down to chew us all out, and like a fool, I said I had no idea we were supposed to do these things. Naturally, 100% of the blame came down on me for this, and my response was humility, asking what needed to be done. Big Boss made out a maintenance plan that the pumps would be serviced every 2 weeks, to be done with the tankerman returning, with a log of the work done to be completed. After what Jim Bob told me, I decided to adhere to a compliance to the point of obsession. I would know those pumps so well I could teach a course on them. As I'd just returned that day, I went full on OCD, doing every check, measurement, fluid level twice and logging it all. I asked Jim Bob what kind of grease and how many squirts to use. I counted the squirts and logged them. He had all the grease, so I had to get it from him. I logged all of my maintenance in the logbook. Not only that, Jim Bob had all the grease in the engine room, so I had to get it from him. I logged that too. 1 tube marine grade number 2345 whatever. Jim Bob and I also went over to the pump with a fine-toothed comb and found every one of the grease points. I added that list to the maintenance log. Funnily, I noticed that whenever I came back, the logbook, which was really just a handful of pages set aside in a crappy notebook we kept in the crew area, hadn't been updated since I'd left. It occurred to me I was the whipping boy. Gumbo and Darnell really thought they had me where they wanted me, and didn't do freak all on the barge. Months later, one of the other barges had a minor fire due to overheating about 3 days before I was supposed to arrive. Company hired a third party to check all maintenance fleet-wide, and ours didn't do well. Big Boss came down with notes to ensure we were following the protocol he laid down. Big Boss asked if we'd been doing the required maintenance. At this point, I'd been freaked by these guys for over a year, and had calmly practiced my response to any question. When Big Boss asked if we'd been following the protocol, I replied that I did it within a day of my arrival, every 6 weeks. Darnell mentioned that the pumps were so dry when he arrived, it looked like they ain't been greased in months. I replied that I could guarantee they'd been greased at least once every 6 weeks, as I was the one that greased them. Then Darnell made the mistake of saying something that set the whole situation aflame. Okay, well, if you say you'd been doing maintenance, okay. They just look to me like they're starved for oil. I say, I get them the day I get back every time. I even log my work. Do you? Darnell says, log it where? Where do you log it? Drunk butt Captain says, I ain't never got a request to log anything. I say, in the maintenance log Big Boss requested months ago. Gumbo and Darnell say, what? What log is that? The logbook tended to be ignored by the other two, and usually when I got back, it was buried under newspapers and XXX mags. I walked up to the tray underneath the TV and pulled it out. I casually flipped to the maintenance log section and showed them the places I'd logged the work I'd done. As an added bonus, I actually started an entry for the next guy, so all he had to do was fill in the numbers. Stuff like name, date serviced, hours run, oil amount added, filters changed, yes or no. Naturally, it was all blank. As an added bonus, I had made sure to not wash my hands before log entries, so I couldn't be accused of pencil whipping due to the greasy fingerprints. I sat quietly while Big Boss, Gumbo, Darnell, and the captain read the maintenance log consisting of my entries and my entries only. Me and Jim Bob just watched each other expressionless. Both Gumbo and Darnell tried to cover for each other, claiming they'd seen the other doing the required maintenance. But Big Boss was no dummy. Where'd you get the grease and filters from? I see no record of transfer from the engine room to the barge. Darnell said, well, we get the grease from Jim Bob all the time. I've asked for at least 4, 5 tubes. Ain't I Jim Bob? All eyes on Jim Bob. Jim Bob did the most amazing thing. Scowling at Darnell, he stood up, threw his coffee cup in the trash, and walked the 20 feet to his cabin. The slamming of the door was like a judge's gavel coming down. I took the dark path. Big Boss, I'm sorry for any problems. After what happened in April, I've been obsessed with ensuring the pumps were properly maintained on my watch. I'm happy to show you where all 17 grease points are and my routine for servicing them. I know the pumps backwards and forwards at this point. He said, OP, that won't be necessary. I've seen all I need to. He snapped the logbook shut and told the captain, we'll talk later, and disembarked the vessel without another word. There's no sexy ending here. Gumbo got transferred to the punishment boat, the worst boat and barge in the fleet, and got written up for arguing with the captain on his first goddarn hitch, last I heard. We got a new tankerman, bizarrely a cousin of Darnell's, but I was pretty confident at this point and took the lead in training them. Darnell was a always be on the winning team kind of guy, and let me take the lead. We wound up with a pretty good crew, hard working, hard partying, just how I like it. When they hired a new captain, he was a guy that had come up with Big Boss, which is why he got the job. And he told Big Boss, you know OP is about the only guy worth a crap on here. I still have the eval he wrote for me. It's on my darn LinkedIn page. The fact alone that OP completely complied to this guy's request, while the lazy guys completely forgot, and OP went to the extent of every time leaving in blank categories for these guys to just fill out, and they still couldn't do even just that, is the icing on the cake. This was a great story. Transferred to work with my best friends. I was in high school, 90s, and was working part-time in a grocery store. I was hired for the produce department. All of my friends worked the front line, mostly bagging for cashiers and retrieving shopping carts. I've always been an overachiever at work, and I actually liked my job. My supervisors were all cool, and I was doing the job for extra spending money after school, so I wasn't heavily invested in it because I also delivered newspapers in the morning. Like I said, overachiever. The only thing that sucked was having to work weekends. One day, I forgot my hat, or maybe I just didn't feel like wearing it that day because I recently dyed my hair green and wanted to show it off. I don't remember. But I do know that there was no specific code about hair color in the handbook, and hats were only required if you were prepping food or in a section like the deli. My direct supervisor liked my hair and said I fit in great with all the veggies, and I should focus on stocking all the green stuff that shift. She was sure the customers would enjoy it. We both laughed and I did my job. The juicy stuff. Anywho, a couple hours later towards the end of my shift, this grumpy general manager, let's call him Bob, was not happy I forgot my hat and decided to grill me about it. We happened to be in front of the customer service desk at the time. He went on and on for a while about young people and poor work ethic. He was really on it about how lazy kids are, so on and so forth. Now, keep in mind, I always did my job well. Never had any complaints or anything like that. This was the first time ever getting a speech from a boss like this. Eventually he got around to it and flat out asked me, "Where's your hat?" "Oh, well, "Gee, Bob, I think I forgot it at home." "You forgot it at home? How could you forget it? You see, this is what I'm talking about. What if I took your paycheck home and forgot it there?" Now, I was not sure if he wanted an answer, so I stood there for what just felt like an eternity, just looking at him while my teenage brain was processing everything. "Well?" Bob asked again. Now I knew he actually expected me to answer, so I said, "Excuse me, Bob, I don't understand." His face started to crinkle with anger. The customer service ladies were watching intently, enjoying the show. "What don't you understand?" "Well, doesn't accounting handle the checks? I mean, you don't actually do anything with them." He started to look even angrier at this point, but I was too dumb to care, so I went on. "I mean, that's my understanding, so I don't know how my check could even get to your house, unless you stole it or something from the accounting people." The customer service ladies bust out laughing. He looked at them sharply and told me to go home and think about what I did, and I would be lucky if I still had a job. I wasn't sure if I was being fired or not. I really was in some kind of shock. So I asked, "You mean I get to go home early tonight?" Again, the customer service ladies chuckled while trying to look busy. I went home a little upset, but tried to look on the bright side. I got home early, did my homework, and relaxed. I went in for my shift the following day, only to find out I was taken off of the schedule. "Sorry, I don't see you on here. Looks like Bob changed the schedule. You're not on until next week." Just then, Bob strolls on over with this "I got you now" look on his face. And I knew his game, so I smiled and said, "Oh my God, that's great. It'll be so nice to have a little vacation," I said, smiling. Then I thanked him. This really worked him over. I guess he couldn't actually fire me, so he was trying to make things bad for me. So he said, "Oh, one more thing. I don't think produce is right for you. I've decided to move you to the front as punishment for insubordination. I've already filed the paperwork." "Bob, really? The front? Are you sure?" He had a smile, thinking he won. "Well, that's fantastic. All my friends work over there, and that's the position I originally applied for. Thank you so much. I'll see you in a week." I left with the biggest smile on my face. When I finally came back, all the front managers officially welcomed me to their team. I was already quite friendly with many of them because I would help out up there from time to time. I was still getting my higher pay rate from produce, and best of all, Bob never bothered me again. I got to goof off and work way less than before. Some of my fondest memories of that place are when I would just hang out in the parking lot with the other baggers, generally having a good time. Never got any other complaints there either. I love this story because everything Bob tried to do, OP absolutely refused to let them get their satisfaction out of it. OP really took the situation and gave it the complete "when life gives you lemons" treatment. If a boss was trying to shift you around to rile you up, would you be the kind of person to still keep a smile on your face just so they can't get satisfaction out of trying to bully you? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Our next story is by the Flaming Heads. HR can't help with bullying. I used to work at a hotel that is part of a very large hotel chain. The management at my hotel, as well as more senior management, was all about nepotism. If you were related or friends with someone in upper management, then you had some amazing career prospects ahead. We got a new food and beverage manager who was a golf buddy of the GM and the executive chef. We'll call him Houston. Houston had previously managed a number of top restaurants in the city, including a Michelin star restaurant. Strangely though, he seemed to change jobs every 6 to 12 months. We soon found out why. The position he moved into oversaw 3 food and beverage departments with around 300 staff all up. Very quickly, we found out that as well as not realizing that we weren't fine dining, Houston was the most horrible pig of a man that I've ever had to work with. He was a very tall, large man who would use his size to physically intimidate other staff and managers. He would shout at anyone for any perceived mistake, real or imagined, that he saw. He was very handsy and often made seedy comments to the attractive young waitresses. Management would often attend events and eat and drink with guests while also making sure nothing went wrong. At one of these events, he got one of the young women in sales so drunk, an ambulance had to be called, and she had her stomach pumped. He was just a horrible human being. As you can imagine, everyone from kitchen staff to waiters to managers were making complaints about him. I know that one manager had gone over the head of our GM and was slowly elevating the issue to higher and higher levels of management, heading towards national level. The response that our HR department was sticking to was that Houston had been hired to shake things up. Apparently, they had expected a certain amount of friction to occur and had essentially been told to ignore any complaints that came their way. They had taken things through the proper channels and followed the correct procedures. There was nothing they could do. Their hands were tied. Enter our story's hero. So the bar in this hotel was well run by a short Filipino man, we'll call him John. Because there were rarely any real issues at the bar, John had mostly been left alone by Houston. John had never seen Houston's bad side come out and never personally had a problem with him. One day, an issue did come up with the bar. It eventually turned out to be a management miscommunication, which was a very common thing. Thanks, management. But that was irrelevant at the time. So Houston decides that the problem is John's fault, storms into the bar, and while John's serving and in front of the staff, customers, and a supervisor, Houston absolutely lays into John, just like he has to every other supervisor and manager in his department already. What the freak happened yesterday? A group complained to me this morning that we hadn't charged their account properly. Sort your crap out and do your job properly next time. And picture this with a large 6-foot-tall man getting right in the face of a 5-foot-tall Filipino while yelling abuse at absolutely the top of his voice. Houston stormed back to his office. John didn't take anyone's crap, and he followed Houston back to his office while they shouted at each other in front of even more staff, supervisors, and another manager. Houston obviously didn't back down or apologize because this is how he had operated for the last 6 months without any consequences. John went straight up to HR and told them exactly what had happened, and as usual, they told him there was nothing they could do. That seemed like it was going to be the end of it. That night, John went home and got legal advice from a friend. Following the advice, he typed up an objective account of exactly what had happened and included names of all the staff who had witnessed the encounter. This showed how many people there were able to confirm his story. He emailed this to the entire management team, including team leaders, supervisors, and other departments, as well as each person in HR. This eliminated deniability in anyone's account, as well as keeping the whole hotel in the loop of what was going on. The next day, John took his written account down to the police station to file charges of workplace assault. He received a document from the police to confirm that he had filed charges. He then sent that document to the same mailing list of management and HR. By the time he arrived at work that afternoon, the GM had started an inquiry into the issue that he had previously been completely unaware of. HR was claiming that they had no idea what had been going on either. This was definitely the first they were hearing of problems with Houston. Over the next few days, everyone in the food and beverage department from team leader up was called into a meeting to discuss their experiences with Houston. At the end of the week, Houston was notified that he was to attend a meeting with the upper management and HR teams the next day. The next day came, and Houston went into his office, packed up his things, walked into the meeting, and slammed his note of resignation onto the desk. HR agreed to an immediate termination of his contract, and he walked out of the job that afternoon. After he left my hotel, he got a job at a small, very average Mexican restaurant as a sommelier. He lasted about 3 months there. A few months later, one of the waitresses caught an Uber home after a night out. Guess who was the driver? These are the moments and situations where your eyes continue to get opened up to HR not being there to protect the employees, but to actually protect the company. They're just there to try to prevent employers from having liability in these occurrences. Now, not all companies' HR is bad, but a lot of them exist not to help you, but just to make sure the company isn't held responsible for something very serious. This next story is by Dramatic Ad 258. I'm not worth the pay? Okay, I'll find a new job. This happened quite a while back. Management in the past was fine and great, but suddenly started to change after an event with contractor. After some time, the upper management, not my supervisor who was great, began harassing those involved with the release of a contractor, mainly Manager A. Manager A would pull people into meetings and tell people that he pays them too much to not do their work. Granted, the group I was with was a small team of 4 that worked 12+ hours, usually managing an entire data infrastructure and all engineering aspects. One day, I get called and was yelled at for being friendly with a contractor by saying thank you for helping me debug a database error. Manager A was having personal issues with contractor, with which led to me being told I wasn't worth the amount of money they pay me. I was told to leave if I wasn't happy there under Manager A. I was the lead engineer and liaison to the IoT division for this division I was in. Afterwards, I called up supervisor and straight out told them what had happened and told them I'm looking now. Fast forward a few months, I leave to a different position in the same organization under a different manager. Manager A is now in the hot seat because no one can manage what I was managing, and lots of security issues are popping up. Since no one knew how to manage servers except for me in the division, they ended up being forced to award a contract worth over 5 times the cost they paid me just for covering my work, not all the extra they wanted coming down the line. To put into perspective, my salary was able to break well into 6 figures. Everything's failing and everyone keeps messaging and calling me for help, and I just sit back and watch things burn from one floor down from my previous desk. Now, I'm not all that smart on management and organization stuff, but I feel like if you got one dude doing the superstar work and keeping everything held together, it's probably in your best interests not to upset that guy. Like, you know, the one guy you literally cannot afford to lose. You probably don't want to say, if you don't like it here, you can leave. He basically said, if you don't like it here, then you can take 5 minutes to make a decision that's going to totally sink my entire division. And our final story of the day is by Toaster Mops. Lazy group member wants us to do his part? Sure thing. I just finished a big group project worth about 30% of our total grade. The groups were selected for us, so I didn't know anyone beforehand. So like any other group, there's always a slacker who just piggybacks off of everyone else's work. This project spanned the entire length of the term, and this slacker just did the absolute bare minimum or nothing at all for each of our deliverables. So here comes the end of the term, and we have to submit our final report, which had to include a video demo of our app. And this made up a significant portion of the marks. Of course, the slacker puts it off to the last possible minute to tell us he's not home and will be busy the day of submission. Our group was planning to record the last day because the rest of the project had to be finished to demo it. So obviously I'm pissed because this dude is just being a huge pain. But I tell him, it's all good, man. We'll just cover your part in the demo. He happily agrees as he won't have to do crap once again. Here's the kicker. In the requirements of the demo, every member has to be in the recording, or you won't get any marks for that portion. Clearly this guy didn't read the rubric, and so he thinks he's getting a good deal. If you didn't participate in the demo, you get a 0 for that portion. Bet this guy's gonna be confused why his marks are so much lower than the rest of us. This is a great malicious compliance, but it's also just the right thing that's supposed to happen. This dude put 0 effort in, did not contribute to the group project. They deserve to get lower marks. They deserve nothing. Use the law to withhold my deposit? Well, okay, here we go. This was a few years ago, so some of the details are a little fuzzy, but I smile every time I think about this. I moved to California in 2010 and had lined up a house on a 3-acre property with a nice-sized detached barn. We were on a rent-to-own to allow time to get settled and secure the loan to buy the property. So we had a standard California rental agreement. With the handshake agreement, it would not be needed once we purchased the house. A couple little things to fill in. The female owner was a realtor, so there was a reasonable expectation she knew what she was doing. The husband was weird. I can't explain it past that, but part of the agreement was that we actually bought the horse that was boarded on the property, and also had the detached barn full of their old crap, with the agreement that it would be removed by the owners once we purchased. So we move in, things are going fairly good. We have several cats at the time, but keep the house cleaned up, and we had one cat prone to accidents, but for the most part we kept everything good. Sometime during the winter, we have an issue with the septic system. The owner proceeds to let it slip. The septic was not put in legally and was not correct. Okay, they still paid for repairs. A month or so later, a water line the husband installed to use for watering the horse broke, and again found out it was not done correctly. This time, I was forced to pay for it. Okay, cool. Once I found out about the septic, I started looking for other houses and found one available, and we were able to get it. At this point, I give the owner about 2 months notice. We had done some improvements on the property, including a tack shed for all the horse gear. My stepdaughter loved horses and the horse was hers. So almost immediately the owner's attitude changes, and I realize we are in for a long 2 months. We're slowly moving into the new house as we have time. During this time, the owner was randomly showing up without 24 hours notice, California law, attempting to show the house with zero warning, and the best one, she started inspecting the house before we were even moved out. At this point, we were about 75% moved. The new house was on 12.5 acres, and we did not have a pen to put the horse and goats into. One day, I get home from work, and we have to call a vet out. Owner's daughter, who used to own the horse, decided to give the horse and our 2 goats a year's worth of glucosamine supplements for the horse. We ended up with a several $100 vet bill. So we sped up things and ended up clearing a few weeks early. Because of this, there were a few odds and ends left behind, including a wooden run-to for the goats. I spent about $500 on cleaning alone to make sure we got our deposit back. I even brought in a professional cleaning service to finish the house up. I spent many times moving from base housing while military. This is common. So we complete the final walkthrough with the owner, and she seems happy. She says she'll figure everything out and send me a check. Okay, cool. About 4 weeks after the original move-out date, I get a large manila envelope in the mail from the owner. Strange, but okay, cool. I open it, and she's trying to charge me in the neighborhood of $2,500 on top of the $2,000 deposit she's keeping. Okay, lady, let's see what you got. In the envelope is about 10 small mailer envelopes and about 300-ish pictures of various things on the property and in the house, along with a 6-page letter outlining what I owe her for. So I start reading, couple hundred for trash removal, including a list of items removed, and the receipt for removal, several hundred for paint. During the walkthrough, I offered to paint the rooms we had painted. One was an obnoxious cotton candy pink, and the owner said no, it was fine. There's also a charge for close to $3,000 for brand new carpeting and high-end padding from Lowe's, as well as the receipt and also an itemized charge for labor. I believe there were a few other items, but I don't have the paperwork in front of me. Now, my first reaction was pure rage. I was seeing red. I wrote the nastiest letter to her 3 different times and took a step back. She had threatened to take me to court. Cue malicious compliance. I pulled up California rental laws, and at the time, there was a great website that explained what an owner could legally charge you for. So I sat down, and I believe the entire letter I responded to her with was around 15 pages. The highlights: I was not responsible for the painting or labor associated with, as I provided the final inspection that did not note any issues with paint color. I was not responsible for the trash removal, as she listed one item that was ours, the plywood run-to in the field, and the items actually listed were all her personal items removed from the detached barn, and it was not my responsibility. I was not responsible for paying the emergency plumbing repair mentioned earlier, and I provided the bill, and the fact that it was emergency as it was flooding over half the property and making the entrance to the property impossible. The best one was the last one, the carpets. So in her letter, she mentioned a horrible smell of cat urine, which she proceeds to explain occurred during the illegal inspections. She also had provided documentation on the cost of materials, including all her purchases. The best part? They were all dated prior to our final walkthrough. No matter the result, she was replacing that carpet. So California law is very specific on what the owner can charge for carpets. At the final walkthrough, she was okay with the carpets, but then changed her mind a few days later. So I explained to the letter that I was responsible for roughly 1/30th of the cost of replacement, as she graciously showed me the 10-year-old carpet was good for 30 years. So due to the fact it was normal wear and tear, I agreed to cover that portion. It was only a couple hundred. Now in her letter, she threatened legal action as well. So I put everything together, including a final breakdown of what was owed to her and what was owed to me, and it was close to $1,500. I also informed her I was ready to take the case to court if she didn't agree with me, as that was the next legal step. About a month later, she had 30 days to respond. I get a check for $1,250 and a short note saying she expected this issue was considered resolved. I have never smiled so much cashing a check. Let me ask you guys, if you were doing a rent-to-own type thing and a short time into your time living there, the septic just totally acts up, You find out that the septic was not legally installed correctly, but the owner goes, "No, it's fine, I'll cover the costs, I'll fix it." Would that still be enough of a situation for you to give up and look for a completely different place? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And our final story of the day is by Hendergol. Disable an employee's innovative screen layout in video indexing application? Okay, I'll do that. Too bad about those sales figures though. This happened back in the days when companies had call centers in the US. I'm old. I worked for Company X, not its real name. Company X got a lot of its business from inbound and outbound telemarketing. I worked for the branch of Company X that set up and managed the call centers where their CSRs worked. The call center the story's about was pretty big. Hundreds and dozens of CSRs sat in a big bullpen with X Windows terminals at their workstations. X Windows terminals were basically just displays, advanced for their time, but all the actual work happened on servers elsewhere. Think of the terminals as just a screen, keyboard, and mouse that only ran the equivalent of a web browser. A CSR could sit anywhere in the bullpen and flip the on switch of the terminal to get the standard homepage. You weren't allowed to change the standard homepage, or anything else for that matter. Everything you did as a CSR was via a script. There was no deviation from the script allowed. In theory and practice, human customers are prone to going off script. One of the apps? I don't think they called them at that time, but it's essentially the same thing. An icon you could click on to do a thing was a video player that allowed the CSRs to look up a commercial that a customer would call about. This was an inbound telemarketing site. Think of it like a private YouTube, I guess. The commercials themselves didn't have a ton of information about what the services and terms that were offered, and the clipped voiceovers that came at the end were hard to hear or interpret. So the idea was that the customers would call, and then the CSR would find the commercial on the app and explain the offer to the customer, hopefully leading to a sale. The app was pretty buggy. Networks, even local access networks, didn't have a lot of bandwidth back then, and video playback ate up a ton of it. Plus, the descriptions in the video's metadata weren't always the greatest, so CSR and customer conversations tended to be long discussions like, is it one where the little boy talks to his grandpa about calling during the holidays? No? Is the little boy black or white? Oh, it's a little girl? And it's the grandma, not the grandpa? Wait, is it the one where there's a picture of a horse on the wall? I'm looking at it right now. It's a black horse. No, the horse is black, not the little girl. Call times for those types of calls were abysmal. Add to that a very confusing home screen layout, and the result was that sales numbers for the site were pretty bad. Enter Jake, which might be his real name because I can't actually remember it. He was a comp sci major at some school that I also don't remember. Jake did not like the workflow of the mandatory/standard home screen, and he hated the stupid commercial video app. So, being a comp sci major, he did the logical thing. He fixed it. Jake figured out that you could interrupt the boot up process of your workstation and get it to load its configuration from somewhere else. I don't remember the exact method he used, but the end result was a very efficient workflow that allowed him to walk customers through the process in a fraction of the standard or mandatory time. Jake also started writing up detailed descriptions for the commercials, indexed by topic, market, where the commercials aired, etc. And even having the era's equivalent of tags. An example, picture horse or character grandpa. He put all of that into a searchable database he created. He somehow got that on his workstation as well. The end result was that Jake could take a call, figure out what video the customer was inquiring about, and walk them through the offering, terms and conditions, and sign someone up in 5 minutes, where it took any of the other CSRs 15 to 20. Disclaimer, I'm pulling those metrics from my butt. The point is, Jake set things up so he was much more efficient than the others, using the standard and mandatory tools. Eventually, Jake's cool new home screen got noticed by the other CSRs. They wanted their numbers for call duration and sales to improve as well, so they asked Jake how he did it, and Jake very kindly showed them how. Pretty soon, a lot of other people were upping their game with Jake's cool new home screen and video index database. You know what happened next. One of the bullpen managers noticed that Jake's terminal always looked different from everybody else's. That would not do. The handbook specifically stated that employees were not allowed to change the terminal. Worse, Jake's video index database made it easy to simplify the script that CSRs were required to use. Going off script was a huge deal. Managers had these headsets that let them listen in on any call, and they could screen mirror any employee's screen. Jake got called into a meeting and let go. I never heard what happened to him, but I suspect he graduated from his comp sci program and went on to do great things. Jake, or whatever your name is, if you read this, sorry you got fired. That was a pretty crappy thing for them to do. I hope you invented Google or something and are now reading this from the deck of your mega yacht. I got called into a different meeting, the topic being, how do we prevent employees from hacking the workstations? I was like, this dude you just fired increased his efficiency in sales numbers by orders of magnitude. Shouldn't the first topic be, how do we implement these same changes for all of the CSRs? My suggestion was not well received. Jake's hack would supposedly cost the company tons of money for retraining, not to mention the salaries required of folks like me, who were tasked to prevent other CSRs from, gasp, improving efficiency. It wasn't an approved standard. Legal hadn't reviewed it. The folks who monitor ADA hadn't vetted it. It promoted reckless behavior in other CSRs. The script had been developed by a lot of people whose job it was to develop scripts. It wasn't Jake's job to develop scripts or apps. It was Jake's former job to read the darn script, say the words on it, and use the tools that were given to him. I spent a lot of time and energy trying to convince my management and Company X's management to use Jake's improvements. But the bottom line was, I was told to just fix it and to obliterate all traces of Jake's hacks. I wasn't even allowed to keep a copy of Jake's database. So I shrugged my shoulders and did exactly what I was told to do, with predictable effect. Call lengths increased, sales rates sank, CSRs who were looking at nice fat bonuses suddenly saw those become impossible, and not a few of them quit. Customers started dropping off calls because they were taking too long. Company X probably lost a ton of business, although I'd be hard-pressed to quantify it. But it was cool, because the bullpen managers were getting their fat bonuses for script compliance, and I got a big pat on the back for figuring out how to lock down the terminals. I honestly don't even remember how I did it. Probably just a BIOS password or something stupid like that. In the end, it probably didn't matter all that much. Company X moved all their telemarketing overseas, and that particular call center shut down. Technology has moved on, but I honestly hope there's someone out there hacking whatever workstations they're forced to use. You can definitely tell that this is an old school call center or tech company. I mean, I guess it's just a call center, but I feel like in the modern days, employees are encouraged to look for any kind of efficiency boosting shortcut or workaround or anything like that. Nowadays, I feel like if an employee found something like that, hopefully they would actually implement it because they realize how incredibly valuable that is. I too hope that Jake is sitting on some mega yacht somewhere being like, I'm glad they fired me. I went on to bigger and better things. Night shift manager suffers consequences of her own actions. Full disclosure, this story happened around 2009 to 2010. I, male 23 at the time, had graduated college 2 years prior and was unable to find work in the Great Recession, so I stayed on at my college job working in a grocery store. At this point, I had landed my first real job outside and had put in my 2 weeks notice, but nobody knew but the day manager. Now, anyone who's ever worked in a grocery store or a similar retail environment knows that there's always a middle-aged woman with an outsized ego, usually obese but not always, running the evening shift after anyone with even remote qualifications has gone home. It's practically part of the position to have a weird sadistic streak and to inflate yourself on the modicum of power the position provides. I digress. A similar-aged fellow, Walter, and I had finished our night's work, being the industrious lads that we were. If you've worked in this environment, you also know this weird sadistic night manager will try to squeeze every single minute of work out of you as possible, so as to make herself look as good as possible. So Walter and I are in the back room doing light duty until close, which is about 2 hours away. In walks sadistic night manager who starts going off about how we're stealing time. We weren't. We were doing light duty, sweeping, sorting, etc. I inform her we're hourly workers with an assigned nightly workload, and we're on to our assigned light duty after finishing. This goes over about as well as if I threw a cup of vomit at her. Sadistic night manager drags us out to the dairy case, gives us a shopping cart, some cleaner, and instructs us to pull out the product, clean the shelving, and reset the product. Walter, who hated sadistic night manager's guts, got this look on his face. Something I've never seen before, and something I hope I never see again. Walter explained his plan, and we both went and got about 5 more shopping carts each. We fully pulled the case, cleaned the shelving, most importantly removed the tags to clean under them, and oops, that was our time for the night. Now there's about $2,000 of dairy that can't be out for more than a few hours max, sitting in the aisle of the store with no one to put it back. We tell Sadistic Night Manager it's there, and leave for the night. The store's closing in about 10 minutes, 11 p.m., and Sadistic Night Manager has $2,000 of dairy set to expire on our watch. Anyone who works in a supermarket also knows that the store managers watch the time clocks like hawks, and everyone is hourly until you make a certain grade. So there's only like 2 salary positions in a store, usually GM and assistant GM. Sadistic Night Manager can't run up her time since she's a 40-hour employee eligible for overtime, and now has to clock out and spend hours for free figuring out the planogram, basically where everything is supposed to go since the tags were off. I talk to the night shift guys every now and again, and according to them, she was there until about 2:30 to 3 in the morning, getting everything back the way it was since she decided to be a jerk and decide that work we were doing wasn't good enough, or didn't properly inflate her ego. Do you agree with OP that every store has this sadistic night manager? Some kind of token manager that is just a nightmare to everybody around them? Honestly, I've never worked retail, and I still find myself feeling like OP's absolutely right. What about you guys? Let me know in the comments down below. Our next story is by R. Duncan G. Ex-wife wants to itemize and split the cost of everything. So my ex-wife and I used to have a great relationship, but she's become petty and somewhat vindictive these last couple months. Our relationship started going downhill after her daughter, my ex-stepdaughter, broke into my house and stole from me and my new wife while we were on vacation together. Yes, I invited my ex-wife and her boyfriend to come on vacation with us, so it would be a family thing. My current wife was completely fine with it. Not only did we invite them, we paid for everything. Plane tickets, rental house, meals, activities, etc. We've done this before, and it was nice. While we were on vacation, my ex-wife's daughter broke into our house and stole from us. We had to file a police report because some of the things stolen was medication, and we couldn't get new prescriptions without filing a police report. This upset my ex-wife, even though we told her before we called the police, and she said, "Do what you need to do." Before this, my ex and I would pretty much just buy what the kids needed while we had them. Every once in a while, she'd ask me to split the cost of some things, and I would. I have never asked her to split the cost of anything prior to this, but lately she's been asking to split the cost of just about everything. Fine, whatever. I usually get most of the things for the kids anyway. About a month ago, my son needed some new equipment for indoor lax. She asked if I would split. I said fine. When she took him out shopping, they couldn't find everything, so I bought most of it online. I asked her what she bought and how much, and I told her what I bought and how much. It turned out she owed me for the split. It was only $40. I would have let it go, but she hounded me for a week over $5. This pissed her off. She'd be fine when I have to pay her, but gets pissed when she has to pay me. I only asked her for the portion of the split because she asked me to split the cost in the first place. We argued back and forth, and then she came up with a list of things we should not have to split, and anything else we would split. So I started to keep track of things that I paid for that were not to be split between us. She gave me her list, and what I owe her, not a lot. I owe her $80, but when I gave her my list and her share, she now owes me $425. This might be kind of a weird analogy to bring into this, but this kind of makes me think of like drawing voting districts in certain states. To me, it sounded like the ex-wife was trying to outline all the things that she probably wouldn't have to split money on very often, only they didn't do a very good job. Maybe they got halfway into it and realized, oh crap, there's a lot of stuff that I'm gonna have to split that I just can't ignore. Going into it thinking they can avoid most of the expenses and push most of the costly stuff on OP, but the reality is, kids are darn expensive. Our next story is by a lot of dashes and underscores. My manager tried to be petty about me being late to work twice, for valid reasons, and it backfired. I've had a migraine for going on over a week now. I had a doctor's appointment scheduled for next week to get help with it, and my doctor couldn't see me sooner. Due to the severity of it at times, I was 5 minutes late to work twice this week. Literally 5 minutes when I'm usually on time. Both times were because I literally had to stop my commute to throw up due to the pain. I informed my manager of the situation, but because he likes to run a tight ship, he demanded I pay $20 for a doctor's note for those 2 days and get it before my next shift, today. $20 is roughly what I get paid for 2 hours of work after taxes. Anyways, I went to the walk-in clinic this morning before work. I had to wait until today because today is the day we get paid, and I was broke after paying rent on the 1st. The doctor who I met for the first time blew all of my symptoms out of proportion. Migraine, tiredness, and red eyes from not sleeping well. He said that I had to get tested for COVID and self-isolate until I get the results. Since it's the weekend, I probably won't get the results until Monday afternoon. Here's the best part. Since I only work 4 days a week and I was scheduled Friday to Monday, I'm eligible to receive 2 weeks of COVID benefits from the government in my country. Friday/Saturday being part of this week, and Sunday/Monday being part of next week. The criteria states you're eligible if your schedule is cut by 50%. So I'm getting $1,000 to have a long weekend at home when I would have only gotten paid $325 if I'd worked. After I tell my manager this, he said I have to come in because they're short-staffed and nobody can work but me. Then he accused me of lying. It felt great to say, "I'm sorry, sir, but it's the law. You'll get your doctor's note when I see you on Tuesday." Considering the runaround they gave you and telling you to come in even when you told them that you're legitimately sick and you have a doctor's note, might be worth weighing your options to see if there's any other jobs that might be out there for you. Our next story is from an anonymous poster. Boss excluded me from a meeting about my clients. Ended up having to deal with a very irate customer. So as always, a little backstory to set the scene. I was organizing private travel for ultra-high net worth individuals, generally focusing on European travel. About a month ago, I handed in my 2-month notice as I'd found a new role elsewhere. After 2.5 years of dealing with my narcissistic managers, constant passive-aggressive needling and bullying. Quick introduction to the characters in the story. Narcissistic boss, we shall call Napoleon. I'm sure you can make the connection there. Client we'll call Dingo, because he's Australian, but that bears absolutely no relation to what happened in this story. So, as mentioned, a couple of weeks back I handed in my 2-month notice to leave the company. And one of the first things Napoleon asked me to do was to put together a full handover of my client list, with a bit of an explanation of their likes and dislikes, regular routes, example margins for flights, etc., etc. As I'm moving to a completely different industry, this was absolutely fine, and gave me something to do. This handover went unacknowledged for about 4 weeks, while I wrapped my stuff up, and spent a lot of time sitting around doing sod all. Wednesday this week, Napoleon decides, right, let's go and decide who gets which of OP's clients then. You don't need to come up, OP. Stay here and man the phones. I had 3 flights that were already booked months ago that would be operating after I'd officially left the company. So these were essentially free money towards targets for whoever gets to deal with them at the start of the next year. Napoleon, being a narcissist and a greedy butt, decides that the 2 flights with the biggest margin he'd take for himself, and screw everyone else. However, had he had me in the meeting to discuss the clients, he would have known that I was in the middle of a fairly difficult discussion with client Dingo over a flight to a certain alpine resort at the end of December. Essentially, we'd been told there were no landing options for the requested airport, and they would have to use a different airport about 45 minutes drive further away. He'd chosen the original one as his kids get car sick, so he wanted to cut down the drive time. I'd been going back and forth with the aircraft owner trying to find a solution, and while they were up in the meeting, eventually broke the bad news to Dingo, but advised that we would offer him money off a future flight, and therefore cutting our margin as an apology. Dingo did not like this, and responded with a scathing email advising us of how awful this all was, and how he was considering canceling the flight, and he'd think about the options that I provided him and get back to me later that day. Cue malicious compliance. Napoleon comes down from the meeting and advises, "Oh, I'll be looking after Dingo and so other clients from now on for you." So I thought, brilliant. If he wants the margin and didn't bother to get the background, he can deal with the fallout. So I send over an email to Dingo saying, "I'm so sorry for all the issues that you faced with this, and I understand how disappointed you are. Please note I've escalated this directly to my manager Napoleon, who will now be dealing with this all personally from this point forward." When Napoleon saw this, he responded, What are you doing? You don't leave for another 2 weeks." To which I responded, "You asked me to hand things over and advised that you'd be dealing with Dingo. So I've handed Dingo over to you as requested. Any information you need is in the handover I gave you a couple of weeks ago, as clearly you don't need any more information." Napoleon lost his crap with me and then had to spend the next 2 days groveling to Dingo, dealing with a very difficult operator and knowing that if he'd thought for a second, maybe it might be useful to have him up here to talk us through the clients, then he wouldn't have to be dealing with this. While I washed my hands of what was becoming a fairly stressful situation and went back to doing various pointless busy work as I work out my notice. Frankly, I think this is a lesson learned. If you have an employee leaving your company under your watch, you'll probably want them to lay out everything that's going on with their work to make sure whoever's jumping onto it can do a good job. And especially if you're making a choice for people to choose what they jump onto, it just makes sense to have the full scope of what's going on before they choose it. And our final story of the day is by Chris J. 1103, Engineering Manager Enforcing Start Times Backfires with Complaints. For context, I'm an engineer in a radiation therapy department at a hospital. One of my team's daily duties is starting and quality testing treatment equipment before clinical teams use it to treat patients. Our official starting time is 6 o'clock to allow treatment to start at 7:30. However, myself and 2 others on the team have always chosen to start earlier, usually around 5:30, to make sure everything got completed on time for the sake of the patients. We never claimed overtime for this extra half hour and still finished our shift at the time we were supposed to. Recently, our manager, who is not an engineer, told us that we're no longer allowed to start work before 6 o'clock. So we did exactly that. We wait in our cars outside till 6 a.m. on the dot, then we enter the building, start the equipment, and begin our work. As a result, at least one treatment machine is signed over late, sometimes only as little as 5 minutes. Every clinical day, because our testing sessions take as long as they need to, this delay ends up meaning treatments are running behind before they even begin, which does not go down well with clinical teams, who in turn send no end of complaints to our manager, asking him to allow us to start at the time we know we need to, just so they can start treating on time. But this manager is a stubborn jerk who won't budge. So we're stuck in the middle of wanting to get the machines ready on time for the sake of the patients, but can't because of how long the tests we perform take. As much as OP wants to go out there and do this extra work for the patients, the thing is, it's unpaid labor, and in the eyes of the law, they wouldn't take kindly to that if it ended up in a court case. All it would take is for those employers and managers to accept that 5:30 start time off the clock, and for one employee to do that for a year, get upset that they're not being paid for that half hour every single day for a year, take it to court, and not only that employee is going to get discovered for this, but every other employee that starts half an hour early is all of a sudden probably going to get dragged into this. And that's thousands and thousands of dollars all of a sudden that they owe. Not only the liability of it, but you just deserve to work only what you're getting paid for. It's a very noble cause for the patients, but they should just rework it so it fits within the working time. Not have a situation where you have to come in early just to make sure everything doesn't mess up. You cannot spend $50 on a haircut. When I worked as an engineer at a Canadian telecoms company, I was deployed for several months in Brazil. After 2 months at a hotel at the business area of Sao Paulo City, I urgently needed a haircut. Being the expensive business zone I was located, there was a haircut place next to my hotel, and I decided to walk downstairs to get the haircut there. They charged $50 US for a male haircut. I had to pay and left. When the accountant lady reviewed my expenses report, she said, "You cannot submit such an expensive haircut." Cue malicious compliance. 2 months later, I had to cut my hair again. I took a $25 taxi to a barber shop in a mall some kilometers away, cut my hair for $25, enjoyed the walk and had dinner, and went back on another taxi for $25, plus the 2 taxis I took earlier that day to go to the customer office. When the accountant lady asked why I took 4 taxis on the same day, my response was, "You told me I can't spend $50 on a haircut, so I had to look for a barber shop in a cheaper area of the city." She didn't bother me again. From all the stories I've heard in situations like this, these people are just fixated on the biggest numbers they can find and trying to get them as small as possible. Well, they were able to bring that number down, but there were just more of those lower numbers. If you were on a business trip and you got a $50 haircut and you got yelled at for it afterwards, Would you feel any amount of guilt taking a taxi traveling around to get a cheaper haircut, knowing it's going to cost them even more money this time around? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Our next story is by Jake No Mistake. Want strict work hours? Okay, can do. I used to work in a mid-sized company in the engineering department. One of the managers started to get upset because if he walked around at exactly 8:30, our start time, everyone was not in their seats. He felt that engineers were being too lax with their time. The edict went out that all engineers had to be in their seats exactly at the start time. I told my boss that I was not planning on complying because I was a salaried professional and expected to be treated as such, and that if they didn't trust me to put in an honest week's work, then they should fire me instead of micromanage me. The older and much wiser engineers took a different approach. They all showed up 5 minutes early to make sure they were in their seats at 8:30, but also set an alarm for 5 p.m. and would literally drop everything they were doing exactly at 5 p.m. and leave the building. Is the manager having a meeting that was supposed to end at 5 but is running a little late? No. At 5 p.m. a series of alarms would go off and everyone would stand up in the middle of the meeting to leave. Does operations need technical support at 4:55? They have exactly 5 minutes on the phone with the engineer before he'll have to get off the phone. Is someone trying to discuss a work-related issue at 8:28? Better wait a couple minutes because no one in the engineering department is answering work-related questions for another 2 minutes. Needless to say, the policy didn't last very long. So from all the stories I've read, it appears the best strategy to take is that if they're gonna nickel and dime you with your start time and say you've gotta be doing this at exactly 8:30, you turn around and say, alright, but I'm working till 5 p.m. and not a minute later because if I'm gonna be in here working exactly at 8:30, I'm gonna be leaving at exactly 5 p.m. You don't want to put that trust in me? Then I'm not going to hustle for you. Our next story is by Turn Your Phone Dummy. I want a Wi-Fi point and I don't care how you do it. Don't care, huh? I work as the lone IT guy at a school and we had a new deputy principal start. People used to refer to him as the blue sky guy, meaning that he would say all these amazing things that are going to happen, but then don't do anything to set them in motion. Then of course, get angry when it doesn't happen. One day he says to me, I want a Wi-Fi point in my office. I said, well, there's one in the room next door, and I can see that you have full bars on your laptop, so there's no need for one. He of course did not like this and demanded that I install a Wi-Fi point in his office. The thing is, his office was tacked onto the side of the building a few years prior, and only had one network point that his desk VoIP phone was plugged into. Now, anyone who works in IT long enough can tell you that there is a second pass-through network part on the phone where you can plug in a network cable. But then I would also need a power injector to power the Wi-Fi point, and it would then be limited to 100 megabits per second instead of 1000 megabits per second. So installing one in his office was not only unnecessary, but would also be slower for anyone who connected to it. I try to explain this all to him, and he just cuts me off. I want a Wi-Fi point and I don't care how you do it. So cue malicious compliance. I screwed the Wi-Fi point to his roof, and ran the network cable down the wall and sticky taped the end of the cable to the back of his desk where he can't see. Sure, he had a Wi-Fi point, but it wasn't plugged into anything. About 1 year later, he said, I noticed that all the other Wi-Fi points have a light on, and mine doesn't. Oh, it's just that you have so many windows in here, it can be hard to see the light. He just left a few months later, and the staff threw a mini party. I then took the Wi-Fi point down and put it into storage. His replacement has not had any Wi-Fi issues in the past 2 years. I'm just gonna take a wild guess and assume this guy had no recollection of how internet or Wi-Fi or speeds worked. Somebody that's so stubborn and dead set that having a Wi-Fi point in the office is going to guarantee perfect connection, like OP eventually chose to do. Sometimes it's easier to just give them what they want, even though you know it's not the right thing. This next story is by Kookabanus. Get your poop off my property. In advance, this is not my personal story, but rather that of a friend of mine and his neighbor, retold with his kind permission. I'm also not very technically minded when it comes to electrics, so please bear with me and I shall explain as best as my layman's knowledge allows. So, I live not far from Milla in North Queensland up in the mountains and rainforest. On my property, I'm blessed with a strong mountain stream that never goes dry, and was perfect for a small hydroelectric setup to produce power for my house. Now, to place it on my property, I would only get a small head of water, meaning the hydro system would not be running at full capacity and produce a lot less power than it was actually capable of. To ensure I was never left dry, I installed 2 hydro systems, which essentially meant I could now run everything as much as I liked. To burn off excess power produced, I mounted a row of heating elements from old hot water systems on the roof of my shed. I could not feed excess back into the grid, as apparently it's illegal to do this from hydro for some reason, but is apparently perfectly alright from solar panels. A pretty nice setup once complete, and apart from a very small amount of maintenance, I never paid a cent for power ever again. I was on very good terms with my downhill neighbor, and eventually we struck a deal to place the generators on my neighbor's property, where there would be a higher head from my weir and the turbines would run at full power, easily providing enough electricity for both houses. So we poured a new cement slab for the generators and ran a new feed pipe from my weir to the new generator site. Wired everything in and hey presto, free power all around. Everything was good for nearly a decade until my neighbor finally sold the place and moved south to be with his kids. At first, the new neighbor seemed okay. He'd been told about the power sharing arrangement, but apparently had not grasped the bit about the generators being on his property. They were down by the creek and in the forest, so it may not have been immediately obvious where they were located. Unfortunately, when he did discover them, he appeared to take it as a personal affront and came storming to my door one night. "Why are there 2 bloody great machines on my place with a pipe coming from your place?" I said, do you mean my hydro turbines? They say, "Is that what they are? Why are they on my property? I don't want them here. You need to get rid of them, or I will." I say, "Wait a minute, those turbines are where our power comes from. We can't just rip them out." He says, "That's not my problem. I don't want your crap on my land. You have 1 week to move them, or else." The discussion went on some more as I tried to get him to understand why they were there and what they did, as well as the original deal to share power because of where they were. He was either too stupid or too rude to care, so I finally agreed to move them the next day. So the next morning, I shut off the drive pipe, disconnected the turbines, and loaded it all onto my ute. I then went to the original side of my property and reconnected the whole mess. Of course, I had to use the original wiring setup to connect them, which only supplied my house. In any case, there was now only enough power for one place anyway, due to the lower head supplying less pressure. All good, and my place had power again by the evening. My neighbor came home after work to a dark house and defrosting freezers and went mental. "Where the heck is my power? I'm supposed to get free power on my place. You can't do this." I say, as I repeatedly explained yesterday, the deal was you get power in return for me being able to site the generators on your property. Now that you force me to move them, you get nothing. In any case, they now can only supply enough power for one house because of their location. So I guess you're gonna have to sort something out for yourself. Neighbor stormed off to buy a petrol generator. In the coming week, he had an electrician in to do a quote to supply mains power to his house. Wasn't happy with that, as the house had been off-grid for a decade and would need extensive modifications to get back on grid. They would need to put a new pole on in his property at his expense, as well as a new fuse box, around $15,000. He then got a quote for his own hydroelectric turbine, but discovered he didn't have sufficient head on his property. The salesman suggested he talk to his uphill neighbor, me, to see if he could run a pickup pipe from that property. Guess who came to my door, cap in hand and very apologetic, to ask if I would mind putting the generators back on his place so he could have power. When I told him there was no way in heck I was going to do that, he asked if he could have permission to run a drive pipe from my weir instead. I say, "Gee, I don't know if I want your crap on my land." I eventually let him do it, although I did make him sweat a bit first. However, there was a condition attached. If he ever made trouble with me again, that drive pipe was going to come out immediately. Haven't had so much as a peep from him since. This guy moves into the house, discovers on their property there's these giant machines they don't understand. Sure, fair enough, go to the guy and complain. But as soon as OP said, "This is what's giving your house power for free," should have ended there. This guy was obviously so narcissistic or argumentative, seeing red or whatever, that they wouldn't allow logic to actually process or get through to them. I've read a lot of stories about Karens who act very much this way. And our final story of the day is by Small of Two Pieces. You don't have any? Well, can you check in the back? This story is from years ago when I was the assistant to the retail manager of a small mom-and-pop swimming pool supply store. One of the many aspects of the job was inventory management. I did the ordering, and I would frequently audit the stock to see what was low, what we had, and make any adjustments in our computer for stuff that broke, was taken by our service department, expired, etc. I also had the displeasure of dealing with customers. It was the middle of summer, and as you might guess, it's the busy season for pools. I would typically work 60 plus hours a week with one day off. Frequently, that day off would be a Sunday one week, then I wouldn't get another until the following Friday. So you can imagine that sometimes my patience was thin. The store is hectic and busy when a customer comes in looking for something. Specifically what, I don't remember, but we had none on the shelf. I apologetically told them we were out. Then they hit me with the classic, well, can you check in the back? Remember when I said I was in charge of inventory? I knew we had none, and I told them I was sure we didn't have any. Well, can you check anyway? Cue malicious compliance. I put on my best customer service smile and say, sure, I'll check in the back in a few minutes. So, I mosey on back to the stock room, knowing full well it's not there. I take my time and stroll through the stock, catch my breaths from the business of the floor, and enjoy the peace and quiet of the stock room, where there's no customers for just a little bit. Then I head back into the chaos of the store and smile apologetically again to the customer. No, sorry, there's none back there. The customer thanked me for checking and left disappointed, but at least I got a couple minutes to myself. Honestly, working in retail can probably be a very tiring thing. If somebody excuses themselves to the back and just kind of takes a breather in there for 5 minutes or so, I feel like honestly, every once in a while it's kind of understandable. I mean, really, there must be only so much you can take with all these people coming through. You probably deal with Karens. You work at a pool supply store, so there's probably people bringing in weird, murky containers of this and that. Do you have this pool toy? How do I fix my water? What do I do with this? I imagine that can get old pretty quickly. We need a urine sample. I was a CRNA, certified registered nurse anesthetist for those outside the US, for many years in the military and civilian life. I'm that job you handle narcotics and other controlled medications every day. There's a record of every dose you administer and every bit you waste. Turn in for random analysis. One day, I was sitting in my operating room minding my own business when another CRNA and an anesthesiologist came into my room and told me the clinical director of the department wants to see me. I'm curious but not concerned. I walk up to his office and am then escorted to the office of another department director and told to have a seat outside the office. I'm getting a bit nervous now, as there should be no reason for me to be here. I'm left cooling my heels while I'm imagining worst case scenario, a malpractice lawsuit, but have never caused injury or death in my entire career. I was actually pretty good being military trained. Now I'm working myself up to the point of physical illness, nausea. Eventually, I'm led up to the office to find several people in suits and a senior anesthesiologist. They introduce themselves and are from the state's Impaired Physicians Division, and I'm being investigated for diverting controlled substances, stealing. My nausea and terror are immediately replaced by red-hot rage. I become calm and focused. Knowing you're innocent and being older and mature helps a lot. As background, I've never had to take a narcotic for anything in my life, except a Tylenol number 3 as a teenager when my wisdom teeth were pulled when I was an enlisted troop. I smoked a lot of weed back then. It was the 70s, but gave that up when I was in my early 20s as urine is randomly tested. I'm told my administration records for hydromorphone, Dilaudid, was incorrect. I'm really angry now and calmly ask, okay, now what? I'm escorted to a bathroom where I have to give a sample of urine while being watched. No problem. Back to the office. I'm asked for a hair sample. I pull my surgical cap off, showing my almost shaved head. I bicycled a lot and it was cooler. I say, we have a problem. I then, in front of the entire office, ask for the scissors. I drop my scrub pants and underwear, grab a handful of hair down there, cut them off, place them on the foil used to ship it to the lab and say, there's your mother freaking hair. Anything else? They all look kind of shocked and go to an adjoining office, leaving me alone with one person from the state. I asked him if I was going back to work. He told me they were discussing that. I asked what he thought. He said by my reactions he was pretty sure I wasn't stealing anything. They let me go and the case I was in was over by then, so I went home. I started a week of vacation the next day. I made the mistake of looking up drug testing stats, looking at false positive rates, and worrying about that for the week it took the test to come back. They came back clean. The problem was of my making, as we had changed to a computer charting system and I had screwed up recording the drug in the recovery room as it was a different system. This triggered an investigation by a pharmacist to see if there was theft. She could have asked about charting instead of going right to the idea of theft. Fast forward a couple of months, I'm asked to go to a conference room where I see the controlled substance pharmacist and all the anesthesia department heads. Since my run-in last time, I had become the most fastidious recorder in the department. The pharmacist starts off by saying my narcotic records are still not correct. I smile the smile of righteous knowing she's wrong. I ask for computer records she's holding. I look them over, hand them back and say, "Nope, you're reading them wrong." She wasn't looking at the post-op record where the Dilaudid is charted in the recovery room. I hand it around to the rest of the table, and every other person agrees with me. She goes pale and says, "Well, you also never turn in any waste, and that's an indicator of diversion." I said, "I give everything I draw up." The chief of the department says, "I give everything also. It's common." She's really not looking well now. I look straight at her and say, "If there is another meeting like this one or the last one, I will be bringing a lawyer, and I'll be suing you personally. And trust me, I have the time and resources to do that, and I would have gladly spent the money to freak with her at that point. My profession pays a very good salary, and I would have eaten ramen every day to finance a lawsuit." Got up and left. Because I'm a vindictive, petty, passive-aggressive jerk, from that point on, I turned in waste narcotics every day. 0.1 milliliters of every syringe I drew up. The OR pharmacist has to account for all that waste, and it made his life complicated. Eventually, he complained to my boss, who told me he understands what I was doing, told me my point was demonstrated, and asked me if I would stop it. I did. Several years later, the accusing pharmacist was demoted for missing a crap load of fentanyl and never reporting it. I was hoping she had bone cancer, but I'll take that bit of karma. If you found out the reason why you had to be taken aside, having to take a urine sample and provide a hair sample on the spot, and then show up for another additional meeting, all happening because your manager just misread the reports, would you give them a piece of your mind? Or do you think you'd be able to remain professional in a situation like that? For me, I don't know, it might be kind of hard. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Our next story is by Colin Alcars. It's too hot in here? Yesterday it was too cold? Okay. This is a story from many years ago, told to me by my friend's father over 30 years ago. My friend's father works for Sears and Roebuck for years. He held all manner of positions throughout his career, but at one point in time, his job included supervising the operators that took your phone calls when you called in orders from the Sears catalog. As I said, this is an old story. Anyway, the operator sat in a room that was contained within the actual store, right off the retail floor, separated by a short hallway and an employees-only sign door. This room held 10 or 12 women who all just took calls and recorded orders for products. My friend's dad said they would constantly complain to him that their room was too hot or too cold, often too cold in the morning and too hot in the same afternoon, etc. Further, some women would complain it was too cold, while some others at the same time would complain it was too hot. Meanwhile, the temperature of the store was centrally controlled, and my friend's dad had no ability to have the temperature changed back and forth on any particular given day without the actual store manager's approval. And what they did was set the whole store to a constant temperature anyway. So basically, my friend's dad would get all these complaints from employees that he was managing that he A, didn't really put much stock in, as there were no other complaints about the store temperature, and B, couldn't do anything about it anyway. So one evening, after the operator's shift was over and the store was closed, he went over to the hardware department and grabbed a thermostat controller, the old school kind that just kind of sat on the wall and had an analog dial to spin and set the temperature wherever you wanted it. He installed it on the wall in the operator's room, but of course, didn't connect it to anything. The next day, the ladies all come in to start their shift, and my friend's dad came into the room. Good morning, ladies. I have great news for you. I know you all have been uncomfortable with the temperature in this room for ages, and you know how bad I felt that I wasn't able to do anything to help you. Well, finally, my requests to the store manager have been heard, and the maintenance people connected a thermostat that specifically controls this room's temperature, and they said as long as you don't run the AC below 68 degrees or the heat above 74, you can set it yourselves. He pointed to the thermostat controller on the wall, and everyone was happy. One of them walked right over and leaned in and made it a little colder or hotter or whatever. He reminded her that it would take about 15 to 30 minutes for the temperature to stabilize after the set point was changed. From that day forward, and for the 5 years longer he worked in that department, he never heard another single complaint from them about the temperature. This isn't really the same thing, but this story reminds me a lot of stories my mom told me as a kid when she was working. She would do some customer service stuff where you have to walk around from room to room, and of course there was an employee break room. In the employee break room, there's an air conditioner, and I guess a lot of people who worked for the company came from countries that were just way hotter. So they're really used to warm climates and warm situations. So my mom was describing it would be like 80 degrees in the break room, and they would have the heat on. Meanwhile, she's walking around from room to room helping people out. So obviously high 70s, low 80s will probably work up a little bit of a sweat. Imagine getting back to the break room, sitting down, and it's 80 degrees and the heat is on. I felt so bad for her when she told me that story. This next story is by Lump KZ. Won't pay for my breakfast? Well, okay, then spend $8,000 on a coffee machine in the name of equality. Let me preface this by saying this is not in the US, but a smaller country in Europe, so a company our size is pretty big. I worked for said pretty big engineering company with around 2,500 employees spread around the world. The main part of us, I guess around 2,000, works in our home country, with the main bulk stationed in 4 big offices. Besides the big offices, there's also some smaller ones scattered around the country. I work in one of those. In total, we're 18 people employed at our office. This is obviously not enough people to warrant a reception desk, canteen, IT department, and so on. That means we get on by ourselves for the most part, unless it's a bigger problem we can't solve, in which case we have to call one of the main offices for help. It's a bit slower sometimes, but it's okay, and we don't make a fuss. This also means that there's some differences in how stuff is done in the different places. For example, in our office, the office tasks, ordering paper, organizing the storage area, arranging office get-togethers and stuff like that, is just something we all do to make things run. None of us mind, as it's just small stuff that doesn't take a lot of time. In the bigger offices, there's people employed to handle all that stuff. Well, one of our company perks is that every Friday we get 30 minutes paid breakfast in the office. In the bigger offices, there's a canteen where they arrange the breakfast, so the employees just have to waltz down, eat, and go back to work. In our office, we take turns going to the nearest bakery and buying breakfast, then go to a grocery store and get stuff to put on the bread, all in our own time before coming in. We'll get the breakfast reimbursed, but not the time. Again, we didn't mind the arrangement, and neither did the facility managers stationed in the main offices. What they suddenly did have a problem with is that we have a habit of buying some morning cakes, cinnamon buns, or whatever we felt like that day. Might sound weird, but it's a tradition where I'm from, and it's delicious to go with the breakfast. One day, my boss got a mail from them with a list of what the breakfast could contain and nothing else. And also a budget for each person because it had to be equal for all offices. That meant we couldn't get our cakes anymore and neither cold cuts of meat for our bread. Both because it wasn't on the list and because we often went a little bit over budget. The office was in an uproar, I tell you. Don't mess with an engineer's breakfast. So we comply and only buy the stuff we're allowed to, but we hatch out a plan. If they want it to all be equal, all will have to be equal, which means 1, all of us start putting 30 minutes each Friday on the company as we're entitled to. Before, we often just put a smaller amount of time down, or we just didn't, and the time disappeared to other tasks, which the company could bill to clients. 18 times 30 minutes equals 9 hours each week of lost time. Already a lot more than what the breakfast cost extra. 2, we ask for somewhere to put the time we spend collecting breakfast and cleaning afterwards, as the other offices didn't have to do it themselves, and it had to be equal. 3, we make a list of other stuff we don't have that the other offices do. We named every small thing that we could come up with, including but not limited to IT department, receptionist, kitchen worker to help collect and make the breakfast, facility worker to keep storage stocked up, fancy coffee machine. What we had was an old school regular coffee maker. Other offices had fancy automatic ones with different blends and stuff. I think around 15 to 20 bullet points of varying pettiness. My boss sends the list to the main office and tells them we need this for all things to be equal, as you wanted. Well, we now have a fancy coffee machine costing around $8,000 to get installed because a new water line had to be drawn to where it's placed, and a much bigger maintenance cost because of different blends, cleaning, and so on. Meanwhile, we're all waiting for our IT department to get set up, but I'm guessing we'll get our cakes back before that happens. You know, it's almost scarily symbolic that the big guys in their giant offices with all of their luxury niceness start looking down at the little guys and start nickel and diming them on what they can and can't do. No, I know you have to go and literally get your own breakfast at the store, but you can't spend $3 to $5 extra per person. Now, if you excuse me, my $8,000 coffee machine that I pressed one button on to make a cup of joe is done, so I'll have to call you back. It's kind of funny to see that they're actually making some concessions to these people, but I think like OP said, I'm willing to bet they're gonna renege on all of this stuff. It's gonna get to the point where they're like, okay, we're done trying to look like we're caring about appeasing you. Just have your darn breakfast cakes or whatever. Wanna leave school early for a concert? Okay, I can make that happen. This true story is a family tale that usually gets told around the holidays each year for a laugh. It involves my sister and my mom, who happens to have a good sense of humor. My sister, not so much. To give you some context, my sister used to be very dramatic and vengeful, meaning if she didn't get her way, the whole family suffered her teenage wrath. So sometimes my parents found out that was just easier to give her what she wanted, hence my favorite malicious compliance story. Over 10 plus years back, my older sister was a senior in high school and was very popular. She arrives at school on a Friday morning and she learns that most of her friends took the day off to go to a large mall where one of their favorite singers was going to be signing autographs. Her and her other friend decide they'll also leave school to join their friends at the mall. So my sister walks to the school office where she calls my mom at home. She didn't have a cell phone yet and asks my mom if she can call the school in a few minutes and make up some excuse so she can leave to go to the mall. My mom said absolutely not, and they argued back and forth enough that my mom finally goes, okay, I'll call the school and get you out, but I'm going to tell them you have to go home because you pooped yourself. Well, ladies and gentlemen, my sister 100% did not believe my sweet mom would actually do this and said, yeah, sure, fine, and hangs up and heads back to class. Not 10 minutes later, the school security guard comes running into my sister's class saying, hi, Mrs. Teacher. I need sister to come with me right now. My sister gets up and walks to the hallways where the security guard has a jacket for her and says, you can tie this around your waist. My sister tells me this is the moment she died. She had called my mom's bluff and she lost. And now to keep up with the act, she had to play the game to be able to go to the mall. She turned bright red and tied the sweater around her waist and walked back to the office. At the office, one of the female school officers had a pair of gym shorts for her and told her, it's okay, these things happen, and gave her a bag to put her pants in and shorts to change into. So now my sister reluctantly goes into the bathroom and changes into the gym shorts and puts her soiled pants into the bag. Once she leaves the bathroom, the office lady tells my sister that when my mom called and told her the situation, she also mentioned that unfortunately my mom was busy and my sister would have to walk the 3 blocks home. So my sister does the walk of shame home with her backpack and her pants in a bag, where she finds my mom totally not busy and laughing hard upon seeing my sister in borrowed gym shorts. My sister was not happy, but whatever. She did end up meeting her friends at the mall, but decided not to tell them what it took to get there. Bad choice on her part because boy oh boy do school employees talk. Come the following week, my sister hears whispers about her being the poop girl, and while she tried her best to squash the rumors, for the rest of the year, she was known as the girl who pooped her pants, which, thank goodness, helped take her down a teenage angst peg. Let me ask you guys, when you were going up through school, would you be willing to take the sacrifice to be known as the kid who pooped their pants, just to be able to have gotten out of school one of the days you were going there? Or is it just totally not worth it? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Our next story is by Bear in the Woods. I'm not an idiot, I just play one on TV. Eons ago, when the world was young and dinosaurs roamed the earth, I worked at a popular electronic gadget store called The Sharper Image. Now, keep in mind that the current company called The Sharper Image is not the same company. The original one declared bankruptcy and sold all its assets, including the rights to the name, back around 2008. And I have no affiliation to the post-bankruptcy organization, as I was employed there only until its closure. Those were goodish times. Sales were constant, customers were rich, some were snobby, and I worked with an overall decent team of 5 to 8 people. As time passed, and I proved that I wasn't completely incompetent, I eventually was promoted to lead sales associate, which made me a key holder. I helped open and close the store, did nightly deposits, and so on. In a nutshell, I was a discount supervisor with no real authority to speak of. Now, the old boss was a great guy, pretty relaxed environment, flexible in scheduling, and overall well-liked. Heck, he let me duck out of work early with him once so we could both hit the casino, and he taught me how to play craps. Those were fun times. And then one day, old boss left. He left the company, left the city, and moved to the other side of the state, USA. The store's assistant manager got a big fat promotion and became new boss. Now, as new boss assumed control of the store, a complete store assessment was performed to give him as complete a picture as could be painted of the store status. And things did not look good. Old boss was a bit too relaxed with his duties, and several thousands of dollars worth of large merchandise was nowhere to be found. Large toys such as underwater scooters, underwater propulsion vehicle $300 a pop, Roomba robotic vacuum cleaners $500, expensive air purifier systems $300 to $550, all missing without a trace. It became widely believed, but not proven, that old boss was swiping merch, selling it, and using it to fuel his gambling trips after work. And our store became a high theft location as a direct result of this. Now, new boss dealt with this by implementing standard security procedures, locking up small, easily stolen items in a secure area, daily inventories of high-priced items, logging and reporting any discrepancies, restricted access to electronic items to only management and lead associates. All understandable and reasonable actions. Theft was still existent, but large, bulky items no longer walked out of the store, and small, expensive ones were mostly under lock and key. Things should have been good there. However, new boss wanted to throw around his newfound authority and enjoyed kicking up his feet and doing literally nothing during his shifts, with periodic bouts of walking the sales floor to micromanage anything that caught his eye. He'd sit in his office reading a newspaper for 4 hours and come out to tell us to re-clean the sales tables or display shelves that were cleaned 20 minutes prior. He'd duck out of work early on a Friday afternoon and forget to put in the payroll so that employees would get paid for that week's worth of work, and proceed to call the night closer, always me because he had a nightlife, to walk the hourly employee through the process. He'd skip out on opening the store the following day because he was hungover, and made the night guy, me, come in the morning after to open the store. While annoying, these aren't that bad, and I tolerated them with quiet patience. After all, I still kinda enjoyed the job, and nothing better popped up yet. But despite all my quiet acquiescence, the new boss somehow got it in his head that he didn't like me. There was never any non-compliance with any of his orders. Work was done quietly and efficiently, and I had never made any waves during my time there. However, new boss began to actively despise me. The worst work shifts, unobtainable sales goals, refusal to replace leaving staff, and pushing that workload onto me. He made it abundantly clear to the entire staff that he did not like me and was doing his darndest to see me fail so he'd have reason for disciplinary action. At one point, I became the only person with the responsibility of managing the high theft stock. This required daily inventory of a small locked stock room with thousands of dollars of pricey electronics. Cell phones, Bluetooth pieces, anything we had that someone thought could easily disappear was kept in that room. New boss was too lazy to ever catalog the room, and new assistant manager was trying to keep the place from falling apart during the day shifts, so it became my responsibility alone. If anything went wrong, only one person would be held accountable. Well, my inner paranoid jerk decided I would keep a hawk's eye on this room, and made it a point to log every item in that room, complete with serial number, every day after the store closed, while the other employees were cleaning up the storefront. Eventually, I noticed things started to not add up. Bluetooth earbuds, still primitive and expensive in 2008, missing. Fancy sunglasses being sold in a gadget store were coming up short. Fancy stuff that had no log of being sold that day was not in the store. Whenever these discrepancies were found, I immediately report them to new boss, just like he wanted, but never seems to do anything about it. This continued intermittently over the course of a few months. Then, new boss began trying to hold me responsible for every missing item from that room. Now, it's true that the regular salespeople needed a key holder to access the room, but even I couldn't be there all day, every day, to open it for them. I was able to defend myself by arguing that between myself, the assistant manager, and new boss, I can't be the only one opening that door to pull out merch, especially if items went missing on my days off, but the writing was on the wall, and I knew I couldn't keep that semi-flimsy explanation as my only defense. Things came to a head when I noticed new boss pulling out a cell phone, removing the SIM card, and placing it in a new phone we just started selling, claiming he was using it as a floor demo to show customers the new features. We've done this with other products before, but never cell phones. You don't open a sealed box with a $600+ phone just to demo it. The company ate the full cost of an item marked as store demo and removed it from their inventory, so those can't be resold after they become a demo item. The company's corporate minions said it was bad for profit margins if every store would mark out a cell phone, so no cell phone demos. Yet here the boss was, playing with a new phone, and when it was time for him to head home, he left, new phone and all. Now, I'm pretty sure new boss had such a low opinion of me that he didn't even view me as a threat at that point. I was just some early 20s guy who was his personal punching bag, so when he left the store, still holding the demo phone in his hands on his way to the nightclub, I had an idea. I hopped onto the business computer in his office and shot off an email to the district manager who handled our store, and about a dozen others across several neighboring states. District manager knew me, he knew his minions, and he knew all the stores that were under him. I messaged him as a lowly senior sales shift leader and asked him what the process was to store demo a cell phone. I didn't ask if you should, I only asked how. After all, I'm a lowly shift lead and I'm just following my manager's directions when he said he was demoing out a cell phone. I mentioned the recent discrepancies in our high theft room and asked for advice on how to deal with that, since new boss doesn't give any feedback when I report it to him. And generally, I make the email sound like it came from some young, naive teenager, when I'm fully aware of what I'm doing as a fed-up 20-something-year-old. I send the email and go home wondering if anything will happen. The next day, I roll into work at 2 p.m. for my regularly scheduled night shift to find all the regular sales clerks hanging out in the front of the store and avoiding the back office like the plague. They whisper that the back office is off limits because the district manager took a 7 a.m. flight from Ohio out to our store and rolled in just after the store opened, just to catch new boss reading the newspaper and playing on his new and unpaid for phone. 4 hours of closed back office later, new boss walks out carrying a box of his personal belongings, and district manager is on the phone convincing a nearby sister store's manager to do double duty until we get our store situated. Over the next week, the ex-new boss called several of my coworkers accusing them of ratting him out and getting him fired, screaming at them and calling them horrible employees. He systematically called every employee at our store except me. I only wish I could have seen his face when they all, rightfully, denied any involvement, and he was forced to realize his designated floor mat was not to be messed with. Later on, assistant manager privately tells me he suspected new boss of stealing the high theft items because he had a quiet cocaine habit, but nothing was ever proven. Oh, so that's what it is. All that theft and stuff, I thought it was just for extra cash. Nope, it was to fuel an addiction. Sadly, that makes a lot more sense. And our final story of the day is by Satanic Butt Mechanic. Got a free car rental upgrade. This just happened today. I was at a car rental place in space, returning a rental. Went inside to finish things up and saw a solved Rubik's Cube. We got to talking about it, and one employee said if I could solve it within 5 seconds, I would get a free upgrade. I said, okay, hand it over. The guy helping me got it and mentioned he was going to mix it up. I said no, to hand it over. I made one turn to mix it up and one turn to solve it. I said with a joking tone of voice, you just said I had to solve it. You didn't say you were going to mix it up first. You should have been more specific. That's what we call malicious compliance. They laughed, said I was right, and gave me a business card for a free upgrade on the next visit. I'm slightly confused though. OP said in the beginning that they were in space. Either way though, doing any kind of trick at a car place and getting a free upgrade, I'm gonna say you take that and run as an absolute epic win. It's nice to see that they had a pretty good humor about it actually. Workaround for crazy high targets cost employer money. When I was a teenager, I worked in a factory which made car switches. On the line I was on, there was a particular variant which was a pain in the butt. It was complicated to assemble and half the time failed on the testing machine. We hated this switch and often had to rework half of them, which wasn't an easy task. It was always because there was some issue with a component that we had to replace, therefore absolutely not our fault. Another issue was that the basic pay was peanuts. It was only by achieving the target that we would get anywhere decent pay. In fact, basic pay made us worse off than being unemployed. Our complaints to management fell on deaf ears. Then one day, a colleague and I figured out that if we held the switch in a certain position, they would all pass. This was not dangerous, by the way. We'd both been to the factory which made the cars, and their untargeted quality controllers tested everyone. So we got our targets out on that variant, and we got our pay. Management became increasingly annoyed that they were getting back pretty much every switch we made out of that variant, and were frustrated as they could not for the life of them figure out how it was passing here and not there. They had multiple electricians and engineers come and watch us, but if you didn't know what you're looking for, it would be impossible to know how we did it. It must have cost them tens of thousands. They ended up losing the contract, and we never had to look at that awful switch again. In general, I think that kind of system is bound to fail regardless, because I feel like that pay setup will only work until people are entirely fed up with it and just refuse to work for that. Do you guys agree that there would probably be a point where people would quit over this pay style? Or do you think that they would be able to keep getting suckers to work for that even though the pay was too infrequent and they weren't getting the bonuses or whatever that they deserve? Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Our next story is by Bloopyhead. Procurement wants to play dumb? Sure thing. I wish I had a juicier outcome than just, we won, but I got a pretty good business and life lesson out of it. 15 years ago, my company developed a unique software for a big company. It's basically a software that manages the workforce. For that initial work years ago, they didn't want to pay the whole upfront cost to write the software, so they agreed to a reduced price, but with a never-ending annual license which included support and maintenance. The product had been stable, so we mostly collected the annual license fee and did some basic support here and there, and added incremental features for a fee. So we recouped our fees and got a better long-term outcome, but a couple of years ago, they changed their procurement and payment systems, and we had several invoices go unpaid. Some were 36 months late, not because of technical reasons, but because the monthly email reminders were ignored, and because the threads that went from one month to the other and from manager to manager were just insane with hundreds of replies and up to 50 people CC'd at one point, going over the same topics over and over again constantly. Them asking for proof of the work request, proof of managerial approval for the work, for copies of the invoices that we sent. They were already there 4 times in the email thread, and so on. Right when we thought we would wrap up the thread, someone would say, "Wait, what are we talking about again?" And the whole thread would just continue with another iteration of the craziness. It was a nightmare, enough to make anyone lose their marbles. We eventually got paid, but god darn. About 5 years ago, they called us and said, "We're bringing in a new backend system at our production facility, so you have to do a major update to your software so that it can talk to our new systems. The new systems will be online January 1st, so it's critical that no matter what, your system must be ready by then." So we agree on a price for the updates. We're told the contract will follow the following week. They assign a project manager/coordinator, and we start working because we need every minute if we're to make that deadline. Except the contract doesn't come. Instead, we're put in touch with the procurement guy to finalize the details. Let's call this guy Ashish. Ashish was also in the previous email threads and not exactly on the ball then. A warning sign. Time tick-tock. First, Ashish proceeds to ask me for the old master contract. Then he tells me he doesn't understand it and that we'll need a new master contract in the future. Then he says he doesn't understand what the software does, and as far as he's concerned, it's just a nice to have for the company. Then he says it should be free of charge since it's included in the maintenance and support. But no, the changes they want are 10 plus years out and out of scope from the original requirements. Of course, we're polite as we answer, but there's something about the way he writes and asks for stuff that makes us believe he's either just dumb or severely overloaded and or out of touch. And or our small contract is just a pebble in his shoe. He nitpicks about details of the agreement, about things that make no sense and that clearly show he's unaware of the context. Since he's my single point of contact to get the paperwork done, I'm starting to lose patience. Time tick-tock. We exchange several drafts, all of which contain more of his impossibly stupid requests and details that are completely unrelated to the task at hand. I mean, who the heck is this guy? I waste a ton of hours explaining what the project's about, why XYZ is necessary, and why ABC clause doesn't apply. Once we eventually reach a good enough draft ready for me to sign, it doesn't come. Time tick-tock. He calls me one day and says he wants to redo the whole thing because he thinks it's not properly framed, and wants me to make him a new proposal, and we have to get a new master agreement anyway. Me make a new proposal? For what? We already agreed to the price and wording for what the new update does. He then proceeds to tell me that as far as he's concerned, it should even be free, so the new contract should take that into account. I explained to him that it's definitely not a nice to have, that if we don't get this done, production will grind to a halt due to the particular problem that our software solves. So I refuse, telling him we're already well underway with the work. He says fine and says that he'll have a last draft ASAP. Time tick-tock. A few more weeks go by, and almost every day I email to get status. Nothing. I eventually get a note asking if my new proposal is ready for him to review. Oh, for freak's sake. I get on the phone with him. We start afresh with a new round of him not understanding anything about the work and the contract, him discussing the issues that are irrelevant, wanting guarantees that make no sense, and a nonsensical wording of the work involved. Oh, and by the way, he now wants to know our cost basis for doing the work because it's too expensive, and we'll have to review the price down. Yet, again, during all this time, he seems genuinely confused or unaware of context, or the pressures the company's under with this. And more, I'm flabbergasted as to why this is the guy in charge of negotiating our contract. As much as I explain again and again, nothing seems to register. Or if it does, we're back to square one the following day. I am going completely insane dealing with this. One day over beer, I explain the situation to one of my buddies and he laughs. Dang, this guy's really having fun. Acting dumb like this is one of the many tactics that procurement people will use to erode all of your patience in the hope you'll eventually just throw your hands up in the air and say, fine. Either just out of sheer frustration, or because the alternative is just no contract, no payment for the work you've already put in. Trust me, this guy knows what he's doing. The proper counter response to this? Just play dumb too. But he knows you by now, so withdraw from the negotiations and put him in front of a totally new guy and have that guy be as clueless as possible and have as little authority as possible, unable to approve any decision, and make him get back to him with unrelated questions and just enough nonsense. Next, tell the procurement guy you're going on vacation and that your team has stopped work until a contract is signed. Maybe he's really dumb, but I doubt it. I think he'll wise up real fast. Brilliant. I get back home from the pub and I check Ashish's LinkedIn profile. Senior VP Procurement, Education, Harvard Business School. Right, this guy's not an idiot. He was messing with me the whole time. Next morning, I talk to my management team and explain the situation. They all get a laugh and are willing to participate in the theatrics. I write Ashish an email saying that I'm putting him in touch with Arnold, CC'd, that I was taking a vacation plus 3-month sabbatical, and that we will resume the work once the agreement is signed. It worked perfectly. The ignorance my coworker played was brilliant, completely believable. Ashish became increasingly restless in his emails and suddenly transformed from being the clueless guy to the sharp exec he actually was, as he realized he might cause the project to not be delivered in time. In the end, we signed the document a few weeks after Arnold took over. We didn't give an inch. We delivered on time. The lower managers at big company were relieved. They too were completely flabbergasted with the stupid email chains, but they were powerless to intervene. It's stories like this that make you really appreciative that you can have your eyes open to it, but it also makes you have so much less respect for the people who do this in those situations. Any of these people that work in a field where they're very high up or they're supposed to be very accredited, and you feel like they're doing really weird moves or things that make no sense, but then you realize they're playing some really underhanded game to try and get their way in a really roundabout format, especially in ways designed to just wear the other person down or frustrate them and just say, screw it, just take it. Makes me pretty quickly want to say, screw that guy. Our next story is by Sky is Good. I kept getting written up for my hairstyle, so I cut all my hair off. When I was in the fire academy, the women's dress code said that hair had to be worn in a neat bun. I had layered shoulder-length hair, so it was difficult to keep it up neatly all day long. The shorter pieces would stick out of the back of the bun or fall around my face, and my bangs weren't long enough to pin back without using an entire bottle of hairspray. Most of my instructors were understanding and said that as long as my hair was up and my mask could seal to my face, they would consider me to be in dress code. But there was one instructor who said there was no excuse. We're a paramilitary type school, so dress code is extremely important. She acknowledged that it wasn't a safety issue, but told me I had to follow it anyway, and that doing my best wasn't good enough. She wrote me up 3 times and then called me in for a meeting to inform me that another write-up for the same issue would get me expelled from the program. I looked into the dress code and saw that the men's hair code was much more lenient. It just said that hair must not touch the collar of the shirt or the tops of the ears. So the night after that meeting, I went to the hair place and told the stylist to do whatever she wanted to my hair, as long as it fit those requirements. She was stoked and gave me a really cute pixie cut. The next day, the same instructor tried to write me up, but since I technically was in dress code, she couldn't. The next semester, there was a man with long hair who wore it in a bun instead of cutting it. And the following semester, the dress code was rewritten to be gender neutral. I definitely appreciate that at the very end of this, they finally rewrote it to just be a hair policy. I failed to see why in Fire Academy, men and women would have different hair dress codes. Dictating what a man can have for hair and what a woman can have for hair seems so 1970s to me. Especially having survived the man bun era, genderized hair restrictions is very outdated. This next story is by the Mr. Tro. Won't give the class paper towels without dispensers? Okay then. I'm a high school science teacher, specifically chemistry and physics, so many of the classrooms I've taught in have a smaller actual classroom that's attached to a large laboratory room, shared between 2 classrooms. In the past, the custodians would make sure each lab station had a roll of those crappy brown paper towels so students could clean up whatever mess they made during labs. But then we were told by our custodians that it wasn't allowed. I don't remember if it was a new rule, new admin, etc., and that paper towels could only be placed in paper towel dispensers. So what did we do? We put in work orders to have a dispenser installed at every single lab table, well over 20 in the building, to have access to paper towels. So instead of just dropping them off, the district had to pay however much money it cost to install all those paper towel dispensers, and aren't saving a dime on the paper towels being used. I don't know who was trying to get a budget cut or save some money here, and probably in the long term as well, because you can't just take some of the roll and then pass it off to another lab. Gotta fill up each of those every single time and stay on that, maintaining it. Definitely just isn't financially savvy. And our final story of the day is by Wrongler Man. Proof of deposits for home loan? You asked for it. I own a flea and farmer's market. I get all cash from booth rentals. Been in business 40 years. S-Corp business, buying a home, and they can't understand me making large cash deposits and want some proof for some deposits. Very well. We use a standard 4 receipts per page book, a lot of $10 and $20 receipts, I separate every page into single receipts and take pictures and upload to the loan company over 700 pictures. Loan is approved. From various accounts I've heard from friends over the years, these people, whether it's an actual bank or a business selling a home, or maybe it's just a homeowner leasing a place or an apartment, it can be difficult if you have a somewhat unorthodox job to get a deposit or secure a lease. Like, even for somebody like me that would be making money from YouTube or, let's say, a Twitch streamer, because they're not actually employed, they don't have a set salary or a reliable figure that they're going to get every single month, a lot of these places just will turn you away and just hope that the next person that applies works at some office, getting this set salary every 1st and 15th day of the month. So an OP situation with the flea and farmers market getting nothing but cash from booth rentals. It sucks, but it scares away a lot of these people that are trying to sell the houses or lease houses out. Oh, you want to prove you're allergic to the vaccine? Okay, now you're fully vaccinated. So I'm a doctor in New Zealand, currently working in immunology. Our country recently, like today, introduced a policy where you need to show a vaccine pass to be able to access hospitality or retail stores. To get this vaccine pass, you either need to be fully vaccinated or have a legitimate medical exemption. As I just started working in immunology, I have a weekly allergy clinic. I had a woman referred into me who we shall call Karen, who had reportedly had a reaction to the first vaccine dose. We take that very seriously, and there was a strong possibility that she could receive an exemption from the second dose or subsequent booster shots, depending on the nature of the reaction. However, it became clear within the first few minutes of the consult that this woman had not had a serious reaction to the vaccine. She was not telling me any of the symptoms she experienced and just kept referring to the reaction. Even direct questioning was getting nowhere. However, after a frustrating 10 minutes, I was able to rule out a severe allergic reaction or a possible cardiac event. The two major concerns for the Pfizer vaccine. During the course of the consult, it became obvious that Karen was more interested in grandstanding about the vaccine than in actually receiving medical care. She accidentally let slip that getting a vaccine exemption would benefit her politically, whatever that meant. She also let slip that she was against vaccines in general and was trying to prove a point. I offered her an alternative vaccine, the AstraZeneca, which she vehemently refused due to risk of blood clots. So I explained what the standard procedure is to confirm a serious allergy. It's called a challenge. Basically, we give the patient the thing they might be allergic to. If they react, we have all of the necessary care with experts on severe allergy right there. This is in a major hospital. And if they don't have a reaction, we know you aren't allergic. I explained it by saying, we give you the shot and see what happens. If you have a reaction, I'll happily write you an exemption for the booster. She agreed to this, signed the consent form after I went through it in detail. I gave her the vaccine, and she promptly had a seizure. I put that in quotation marks because it was the least convincing seizure I have ever seen. I've seen drug addicts trying to score benzos in the emergency department having more convincing seizures. I'm not even willing to call it a pseudo-seizure, it was that terrible. She literally laid down, didn't fall, she actually laid slowly on the ground, and started flopping like a fish while periodically looking at us to make sure we were watching. I've never seen anything like it. Her vitals were all completely normal, blood was completely normal, everything was fine. After she had recovered, Reed got tired and gave up. My boss, who had taken over by this point because of how bizarre it was, explained to her that she did not have a reaction to the vaccine, was kind enough to call it a pseudo-seizure, which is essentially a seizure-like event caused by a psychological trigger rather than physical that to the patient feels like a real seizure but is not typically dangerous. He informed her that she would not be receiving an exemption. That resulted in much yelling and shouting until I calmly informed her that she didn't need an exemption as she was now fully vaccinated. She received the first dose prior to being sent to our clinic, and we gave her the full second dose during the challenge, so she was covered. The look on her face was absolute gold. She then proceeded to declare that she had not consented to being vaccinated, she had in writing, and that she refused to accept that she was vaccinated. She was, and that we were trying to prevent her from claiming to be unvaccinated. We weren't. She then stormed out of the clinic when I gave her a "I'm fully vaccinated" sticker, which we normally give out after a second dose. I kinda got in a tiny bit of trouble for that bit, but It was so worth it. It was an entertaining afternoon. If you were a doctor in a situation where the patient claims to have something that they don't have, you watch them literally lay down on the ground and flop around like a fish, would you get a kick out of just standing there watching them, waiting for them to finally stop and get back up? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Our next story is by Chainsmoker Magic. Don't speak Spanish in front of you? Okay. How about French? No? Maybe German? So this is an interaction I observed in a convenience store the other day. It was a busy day, so there was a bit of a line, and behind me was a couple speaking Spanish to each other. My Spanish is not the best, but I understand enough to overhear them being cute and flirty with each other. Kinda made me smile because, ain't love grand? Enter Karen, standing behind them in line. Obnoxiously large sunglasses, the classic haircut and red lipstick on her teeth. Probably mid-40s, she gets into the line and immediately starts looking visibly annoyed. She grunts and sighs audibly, prompting the boyfriend from the Spanish-speaking couple to turn around. "Hey, is everything alright?" he said in perfect English. Karen gives him a look that could peel paint from the walls and says, "Oh, I'm fine. I just wish people had better standards for themselves. You know speaking Spanish in public makes you seem uneducated, right?" Now, my knee-jerk reaction upon overhearing this was to turn around and tell this lady where she can stick it, but the boyfriend beat me to it. As soon as she said uneducated, the dude's face inexplicably lights up like a Christmas tree. He smiles at her and immediately turns to his girlfriend and starts saying something in French. The girlfriend responds to him also in French. He turns back to Karen and says, "Is that better?" At this point, I'm giggling to myself because darn, this was great, but it's not over. Karen stares at the guy, mouth agape, completely speechless. "No? How about this?" he asks, and turns to his girlfriend and asks her something in what's clearly German. The girlfriend laughs and responds, also in German. Now, I don't speak French or German, but really, I didn't need to. This was comedy gold. At this point, I'm just busting out laughing. Karen and the other people in line saw me, so I just turned to the boyfriend and simply smiled at him, and then turned to Karen and let off a, "Darn, he told you." I had paid for my stuff by then, and I leave as I hear the girlfriend ask, "So how many of those languages are you educated in?" Wish I stayed around to see the end of the interaction. From the moment the dude spoke French, Karen's face was just priceless. But I'd already interjected with some smart buttness, and confrontations really aren't something I'm looking for in my life. Besides, these two didn't need anyone's help. This really gives you a look into Karen's mindset. For some reason, this Karen seems to think anybody that can speak Spanish means they're less educated. I love that this couple turned around and just showed up this Karen and left that Karen just mouth gaping there. Maybe after that point, the Karen wasn't educated enough to construct an actual sentence. This next story is by the doomed hero. New army captain tries to end her career. I used to be an armorer in the US Army. I was the person in charge of securing and maintaining all the weapons. I was stationed overseas at a base that only had one arms room, and I was the guy who ran it. So instead of just being responsible for the weapons in my unit, I was responsible for all the weapons in the entire post. On paper, that's a job that's supposed to be done by an E6 with a 2-person support staff. In reality, the position was chronically short-staffed. It was just me, as an E4, doing the job of 3 people. Because the position was critical to the operations of a bunch of different units, including things like PSYOPs and Special Forces, where everything about them is classified by default, and joint operations with the Navy and Air Force, and a few foreign militaries who were working with the US, I had to get a security clearance that was higher than everyone else in my own unit. As far as I knew, there were only 4 other people on the post with clearance high enough to do what I did, and they were all officers. This led to some amusing situations where I was accidentally called for security briefings that were way above my pay grade. That sucked because I was on call all the time and had to go to work anytime anyone needed a weapon. Being on call was supposed to be a duty rotation, but I was the only one who could do it, so I slept in the arms room a lot. I wanted to make sure I had as little to do as possible, so I got very good at my job. How good? During an army-wide review of the entire supply chain, my post was found to be the best run arms room in the entire army. I won a medal and everything. Then we had a change in command, and the new captain hated that I didn't have to go on training exercises because I wasn't allowed to be more than 30 minutes away from the arms room ever. The compliance, the new captain was absolutely determined to take me on a training mission. She'd somehow gotten it into her head that I was a slacker, which I absolutely was, but only because I was efficient and pissed off that I never got to leave the base. So she drew up a bunch of paperwork to sign the arms room over to the supply sergeant. I refused to sign because the person with all the ammo and the person with all the guns are supposed to be different people. Next, she tried to sign the arms room over to the PsyOps company commander. I refused to sign because that commander had become a friend of mine, so I knew he was required to leave the base weekly for security briefings. Finally, she tried to sign the arms room over to our company's supply lieutenant. I tried to explain that the lieutenant didn't have a high enough security clearance, but she cut me off. She said she was tired of my excuses. Then she ordered me to sign and threatened me with an Article 15. I wrote under duress on the paperwork. She didn't even look at the signature, so I sent an email to the warrant officer who was in charge of logistics for the area. He was the guy who'd given me the award I mentioned earlier, so he was pissed when he found out what was going on and went on the crappy little weekend training exercise and basically enjoyed my vacation. That sequence of events happened on a Friday afternoon. The chief didn't get my email until Monday morning. On Monday afternoon, my captain was relieved of command. I eventually had to testify at our disciplinary hearing. My second favorite part of the whole experience was the supply lieutenant who got a slap on the wrist for inadvertently obeying illegal orders because he hadn't learned the regulations before signing, saying, "Is it like that for you all the time? This has to change." My favorite part was the full-bird colonel in charge of the hearing asking my former commander, "Your soldier was awarded for being the best at his job in the entire army. After he refused your orders the first few times, why didn't you start asking questions?" I think the greater question that they should have asked is something broken? Sure, they can be annoyed that you're not going out anywhere or traveling or doing other things, but if everything you're doing is keeping things running smoothly, why would they care so much? Our next story is by TalYYR0. Save up to 15% on your water bill by shafting the unhoused today. I work for a Canadian harm reduction clinic run by a big non-profit. We have 2 gigantic laundry machines down here for towels from our shower program and clothing donations. Because the clinic budget comes from the government and the building budget comes from the non-profit directly, he forbade us from doing the client laundry because it runs up the building's water bill. And we ain't paying for that. Like even just once or twice for someone who's sleeping in the literal dirt and mud and snow, still a no. So now I tell clients that since we can't wash their clothing for them, they may as well donate it to us. I launder to put it out and lo and behold, there's a client right here who just gave away all their clothing and has nothing to wear. So I distribute the now warm and clean donations I just received from them back to them. Suck a doink, boss. Honestly, the management here is so asleep at the wheel, I'd be floored if he ever actually notices the water use. It's been 2 months since his declaration, and I'm just still quietly doing my daily end run around my boss to help folks. I think if you just boil it down to basic human decency, that's the right thing to do. Good on OP. And our final story of the day is by some weirdo in SA. Insist I announce every time I have to pee? No problem. So this was a few years ago, after just receiving a promotion at my previous company and working under a new supervisor, who we shall from here on call Karen. This is one of many altercations between us, but the only one that contains malicious compliance from my side. This was a desk job position, which also had customers calling to schedule services or repairs on their warehouse machinery. Out of proactiveness, I would discreetly tell the person that sat next to me if I were going to the loo, in case my phone rang so that they could take a message. This had worked fine for a few months, with no issues until one day. Karen usually had varying moods, and this day was a bad mood day. Nonetheless, I continued doing my stuff, keeping my head down and whatnot. I let my neighbor know I'm headed to the bathroom and make my way. Out of curiosity, I used to time my loo breaks, and I was never away from my desk for longer than 3 minutes. I walked back into the office and had not even sat down yet when this exchange happened. Karen shouting, "Where the heck have you been?" Me, already pissed at her tone of voice, say, "I was peeing, why?" Karen says, "You should tell people when you're not going to be at your desk. I'm tired of picking up your calls. Call this person back and see what they want." They hand me a note. Me, noticing my neighbor was not at her desk, I say I had told neighbor where I was going. Karen says, "Well, you have to tell me too. I need to know where you are if I'm going to be answering your calls." Me, already hatching my malicious compliance plan with a huge smile on my face, say, "Okay, no problem. I'll do so in the future." It was this day that I decided I should really start looking after my health and make sure I get in my 8 glasses of water a day. So the next day I arrived with my 500 milliliter water bottle, knowing I would need to finish the bottle 4 times before the workday ends. I was going to the bathroom about hourly, and each time I would stand up, walk to her table, wait if she was on a call, then politely tell her, "I'm going to go pee now," with the biggest smile on my face, and then go. After about a few weeks of this, she eventually cracked. Karen very loudly said, "Why do you keep telling me when you need to pee? I don't want to know your internal schedule," as if she had forgotten her outburst a few weeks prior. I say, "You said I had to tell you if I were going to the bathroom a few weeks ago." Karen, remembering the incident, said, "Well, I didn't mean to tell me each time. As long as someone knows where you are if your phone rings." Me, smiling still, say, "Sure, I'd rather do that then." Cue the new malicious compliance plan just to make sure this issue never gets brought up again. From now on, each time I had to use the bathroom, I would announce it in the office as I stand up. "I'm going to the loo in case my phone rings." My colleagues all smirked the first time I did this, and they all started following my lead and announcing loudly whenever they went to the bathroom. This continued for the following 3 years that I still worked there. New hires thought it was just protocol and did it without question. This announcement did work in everyone's favor though, because en route to the bathroom was a different department's office that we would often have to hand paperwork to. So whoever was going to the bathroom would usually ask if there was anything needed to drop off at that department on the way. And before I get people accusing me of possibly being a slacker, and that being the reason the supervisor was on me the whole time, I was one of the hardest working employees at that company and got 4 promotions in the 5 years I worked there. Karen was a witch to everyone. See, what I think Karen was really after was cutting down on the amount of bathroom breaks. It might have also been influenced by them just being annoyed having to help out a little bit more, but I personally do have a suspicion that this Karen just would prefer if everybody stayed at their desks the entire day. But OP ain't gonna let that stop them. This sub inspired a small malicious compliance prank on girlfriend's birthday, so I spent way too much time in this sub reading stories here, and last night an opportunity presented itself to enact my own malicious compliance. So today's my girlfriend's birthday, and we have a bunch of things planned out. One of those things is an escape room with some friends that her mom bought as a present because we're living in a different country. However, girlfriend's mom asked me to keep the event itself a surprise, so girlfriend has no idea what's happening. For the last week, she's been wondering what it could be, and last night after the clock turned midnight, she said to me, "I want 3 guesses, and if I get it right, you have to say yes." I thought about it for a second and then asked her, "That's it?" Yep, so I agreed. I knew she wouldn't get it as this isn't something we would normally go do. She's done it in the past and liked it, but just not a regular thing. And so I let her guess away. At the 3rd attempt I say yes, because even though it was wrong, nothing had been specified about how I had to answer if she did not get the answer right. I stringed her along for a few minutes about her correct guess before reminding her about her rules, and then emphasizing the lack of what to do if the answer was no. She was not amused for all of 2 minutes, while I got a good chuckle and a small story for a sub that I love. Well, they did say you have to say yes. Let me ask you guys, are you the kind of person that loves dropping surprise gifts or surprise trips, events, anything like that? Or are you the kind of person that when it comes to giving gifts, you prefer to give it to them as upfront as you can or maybe as soon as possible? Let me know about you guys in the comments down below. Our next story is by Ben Hawking, The Biggest Stocking. As an adult, I traveled to my grandma's mom's house for Christmas. Adults were expected to bring our own Christmas stockings, but Grandma, and a couple helpers, I think, would fill up everyone's stockings, chocolate, socks, etc. on Christmas Eve. Well, since we were responsible for bringing our own, I found a very large stocking. While maybe I'm partially hoping this will result in lots of chocolate, I also just like making jokes, and I found it to be a funny thing to do. Christmas morning, I woke up and checked my stocking, and it was full with a 25-pound bag of charcoal. Can't say I didn't deserve it. I just want to believe that this grandma was secretly holding on to a bag of coal for any time somebody was going to try to act up or get wise and they deserve that bag of coal. You gonna go and be a smart butt? Don't be surprised when grandma gives you some coal for Christmas. This next story is by Steve Was Happening Now. Colleague required an agenda, so I created an agenda. A few years ago, I was talking on the phone to a colleague. We were both executives but didn't report to the other. We ran out of time but agreed to discuss Project X further in another meeting, which I was to set up between just the two of us. I did the meeting invite. Her admin called and said that Susan doesn't accept meetings without an agenda. I explained Susan knew what the meeting was about. The admin was insistent, so I created this agenda. 9 a.m., meeting starts. 9 to 10 a.m., discuss Project X. 10 a.m., meeting adjourns. I held the meeting, and no one ever mentioned my detailed agenda. I mean, while you're at it, if you're gonna go on a bathroom break, you might want to draw up a detailed agenda of what's going to happen there too. 9:30 a.m., find the bathroom. 9:30 a.m. in 30 seconds, locate the nearest toilet. You might as well make a detailed agenda of how you arrive to work. I get there's like formalized processes and stuff, but sometimes it's just kind of redundant. Our next story is by Lena Cakes. Another manager perspective malicious compliance. I just saw a post from a manager's perspective and it unlocked this memory. I was just starting out in my industry but quickly was promoted to team lead and then manager of my group. Turns out I made the least of the old team and management wanted them all to quit. Go figure. I live in an area that sometimes gets heavy snow, making getting to the office time consuming and dangerous. My former boss lived in another state and worked from home, but no one else was permitted to work from home. So we all had to deal with it. Most of the senior managers worked out of state from home. One year it was pretty bad, and when I suggested leniency on working from home, my boss said I could work from home, but no one else could. And if they didn't like it, they'd have to use their pathetically little vacation days. I lived closest to the office, so there was no way in heck I could tell my team they had to report, but I was going to stay home, and I thought the whole thing was BS. So, one very snowy day, I got a call from an employee requesting to work from home. I informed her of the policy, and she was pissed and said, "Fine, I'll take a day off." A few minutes later, another call, same results. We had a huge workload that day and ended up with me and one other person working. I called my boss to ask her what to prioritize and to inform the sales team we wouldn't hit their deadlines. I could hear the steam coming out of her ears when I explained the team took PTO. Before the next storm, the rules changed to if there's a state of emergency, they can work from home, and then again to if the school's closed in their area, they can work from home. I left that place and haven't looked back. Last I heard, they're still being crazy aggressive about work from home, and management is at each other's throats with high turnover and not so quality employees. Now, I don't know if I sound a little biased here, but I think work from home is a pretty good idea. I think if there was ever a positive that came out of this pandemic, it's that a lot of employers had to switch to work from home to just make it work. And that happened for a lot of places that staunchly refused work from home, but once they had to do it and once they tried it out, it's been revealed to be a relatively successful thing. Obviously, not every business can be work from home, but a lot of places can, and they just prefer to have that in-person connection, but a lot of times it's more like supervision, ability to micromanage, stuff like that. This next story is by PM Me Your Dank Memes. Stay at the table until you finish your vegetables. I am a stubborn person. As a child, vegetables made me gag. I also hated textures, but I compromised. I would eat anything without veggies. I also didn't care about sweets and tended to stare into space as a pastime. My parents were concerned for my nutrition. They tried escalating tactics. 1. You don't get dessert unless you eat the veggies. No big loss. 2. No dinner until you finish veggies. No problem, I can ignore hunger. 3. Alternate bites of veggies and other food. First bite was very big of normal food, then done. 4. Can't leave the table until eat veggies. This one was the funniest to me. They had to let me eat something as they were losing the power struggle, but they assumed I would need to go to bed. Anyway, I had no trouble complying. I slept at the table. They walked into my room saying they hoped I hadn't broken the rule, then calling my name, and they found me at the table. They tried saying I also couldn't have breakfast until I ate the now cold veggies. The veggies had been canned. Least appetizing prospect. I just sat there in yesterday's clothes knowing my mom had to go to work. I tried to get out of school citing the table and that I was already going to be late if I had to change. I don't remember after that, but I assume I went to school. I was about 5. Unfortunately, they gave up. And it was 10 years until I ate veggies. Yeah, that was probably bad for me, but what could the parents do? My mom tried to force feed me a carrot when I was 4, and that didn't help. Although OP was very staunch in what they were doing, and they tried a good few things, I still think this falls on the parents. Whether it's like super finely chopping them up, or trying to figure out like a smoothie or something, or even just like buckling down and trying to get like OP to take vitamins or something. Reading this, it does leave you a little bit concerned as far as OP's health growing up. Our next story is by Jerryboy1, Old Lady, and a Rat. Hi from New Zealand. I was managing a large farm supply shop, stock feed, fence posts to animal health, and I lived in the countryside. I was well known locally and would often chuck some bits and pieces into my ute, pickup truck, and drop them off to clients on the way home. One older lady, Mrs. Grumpy, 70, would ring, want a 40-kilogram bag of dog biscuits delivered, lugged into a distant shed and emptied into a 200-liter drum with a removable lid. Never a thank you or moving obstacles to make it easier. I did it as her husband had been a good client and a nice guy. The last time I delivered to her, I took the lid off the drum and there was a huge rat running around on the bottom of the drum. I slowly tipped the dog biscuits in. The rat kept climbing. After 40 kilograms, it was near the top. Then I slammed the lid on. Dear old Mrs. Grumpy never got me to drop any more off. Now we all know that Mrs. Grumpy clearly would have opened that drum, saw that rat, had a heart attack, died, got revived, and came back blaming OP for putting the rat in the drum. It wasn't there before the delivery. And our final story of the day is by Daychrist. Your job isn't helping customers. I'd just started working at Fry's. For those who don't know, it was a big box electronics retailer, sort of like a micro center with terrible management at anything above the department manager level. I found this out firsthand shortly after finishing training. I worked in the components department, think computer parts for builds and electronic stuff you'd find at Radio Shack, and I was a sales associate. That meant I was on the lowest rung and didn't earn a commission from sales. My department manager had explained to me that I didn't get commission, but my primary responsibility was still helping anyone who came to the department. If you did well enough at this, you'd be moved to commission sales where you made the big bucks. So I tried to be helpful. Plus, everyone wore the same white shirt and tie, and customers didn't know the difference between commission sales and associates. Then corporate came. The corporate components manager breezed in to tell everyone how to do their job, and in her eyes, that meant I was supposed to be putting together product schematics to the exclusion of everyone else. So she condescendingly took me aside to review how to put products on a peg. In the middle of this demonstration, someone came up to ask where a product was, and I tried to help them. That didn't sit well with corporate lady, so she stopped me in front of the customer and told me that wasn't my job, and that she would help the customer. That earned her an odd look from the customer, but whatever. So I continued doing the schematic. It wasn't exactly the rocket surgery she made it out to be. Apparently she got distracted haranguing other people because it was an hour or so before she walked by, while I was helping another customer. Again, she came up and started yelling at me that my job wasn't helping customers and I needed to get back to work or she would write me up. I shrugged. Whatever. It was a job I took to pay bills during grad school, so it wasn't worth arguing. I would do exactly what she said though. I was putting together a product schematic right near the front entrance that day. That meant a lot of people would come through, and I was the first worker they saw. So they'd come up to me and ask where to find something. Normally I'd be happy to help, but not that day. I wasn't going to get written up, no sir. So every time someone asked me to point them to something, I politely apologized and told them I couldn't help. They'd inevitably get angry when they realized I wasn't helping them, so I'd apologize again and tell them it was corporate policy that I wasn't allowed to help them. And oh, by the way, that policy was put in place by corporate manager, who just so happened to be at the components podium that day if they wanted to go ask her anything or talk to her about that policy. She never did come over to apologize or tell me to do anything any differently. This lady was too convinced that her way of doing things was the right way. I did have the pleasure of looking down the aisle to the podium and seeing a steady stream of irate retail customers who are always a special mix of belligerent and stupid, laying into her with complaints that got more and more irate as they realized everything I told them was true. I'm told she didn't end up getting much done that day because she was too proud to admit it would be better for me to take 5 seconds out of hanging products on pegs to point someone to the right part of the store. As soon as she left, we went back to helping anyone who came through, even if I was doing the extremely difficult intellectual task of hanging products on the proper peg. I wasn't at all surprised a few years later when the company started circling the drain because they couldn't pave over the incompetence at the corporate level in a world where Amazon and Newegg were eating their lunch. How are you going to be helpful to customers as an incentive to move up, but then also have corporate managers come in and say, your job isn't to help customers, don't you dare do that. The corporate manager is basically saying, do stuff that's outside the scope of your job if you want to get a better promotion, but I better not dare catch you doing it. But if you do it and you do it well, you'll get a promotion, but I better not catch you doing it. It's really no surprise if you go to a store, an electronics store especially, you're looking for some part you're just not very sure about. You see clearly an employee, you go up to them and you say, hey, where is so-and-so part? Or hey, could you help me real quick? And they say, sorry, can't help you, company policy. I can see how that would drive customers away from your store probably permanently. Why go to an electronics store where you're not gonna get any help? But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So of all these stories I've read today, which is your favorite and why? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you haven't yet, if you could like and subscribe, that would mean a lot to me. Whatever you do, whether it's liking, subscribing, turning notifications on, all of it helps grow this channel and I appreciate the heck out of it. So until next time, I'll see you all tomorrow with some more stories.